My boyfriend and I like going out dancing on the weekend, which always ends with us stumbling into our favorite pizza place. We've done this most weekends for over a year now, so we've become somewhat friendly with the guys who own the pizzeria. They know us by name and always make a big fuss over us and offer us a discount every time. One night, a Sunday night at 11 p.m., my boyfriend and I were in bed because we both had work the next morning. My phone started ringing, which was weird for that time of night, and I saw it was an unknown number, so I ignored it. The next thing we know, there was some knocking at the front door. All the lights in the house were off, so we were clearly in bed or not at home. I had another call from the same number, and then the person knocking started hammering on the door and flicking the mail slot. My boyfriend got up to answer it, even though I was a bit shaken up, and warned him not to. He went downstairs to answer the door, and lo and behold, it was one of the guys from the pizzeria holding 2 freshly cooked pizzas that we didn't order. He said not to tell the other guys of the shop, but they were a gift from him to us, his favorite customers. My boyfriend took the pizzas from him and thanked him, but we couldn't get back to sleep for hours. We just felt so odd about it. We had just left the pizzas in the kitchen because we weren't hungry and eventually threw them away. We had ordered from there once for a takeout, so that was clearly how he got our address and phone number, but it was still weird. After that night, the guy who I will call Bill turned up at our house. My boyfriend and I went out for drinks a couple of weeks later and ended up in the pizza shop. We noticed immediately that Bill wasn't there, and I assumed that he was out on a delivery instead. Before we left though, the manager came out of the back and said hello, and then apologized profusely about Bill's behavior and told us that he had fired him. He was very thankful that we were not boycotting the place, and I assured him that we wouldn't because it was really the best pizza in town. I'm not sure how the manager found out about Bill bringing the pizzas to our house, but I informed the manager about everything else that happened that night, how late it was, Bill calling my phone, and the manager was furious to say the least. He assured us that he wouldn't be letting him work there again, and my boyfriend and I went on our way and went back home. A few months later, we moved to a new house and never heard from him again, until he showed up one night at our new house. He was delivering food for Uber Eats. I didn't want to take it farther because we hadn't heard or seen from him in months, so we just left it alone and went about our lives. But then, about a month ago, I was going through my message requests on Facebook, and I saw that somebody called Bill had been messaging me, or rather trying to message me, for months. I went into the messages and clicked his profile, and lo and behold, it was Creepy Bill. I blocked him immediately, and it was then that I decided I would report him on Uber Eats. So I filed a complaint about him and haven't heard anything since. But I still have no idea how he found me on Facebook or how he knew my surname, but he did, and he tried to message me for months. This happened last October. I live in a small town in upstate New York, and every fall my sister and I go apple picking. It's a tradition, and we go to this orchard about 20 minutes outside of town. It's family run, not too crowded, and they make good caramel apples. That Sunday we got there around 10 a.m. The sky was overcast and there was a chill in the air. The parking lot was half full. We brought my nephew, who's 5, I'll call him Tyler. It was supposed to be a short trip. Pick a few bags, grab some caramel apples, and head home. We paid for our bags and walked past the little farm store into the orchard. The apples were a bit picked over, so we had to walk farther to find the good ones. Tyler ran ahead like he always does. We were in the 3rd row of trees when a man came towards us from the far end. He looked like anyone else. Jeans, hoodie, ball cap, probably in his mid-30s. No bag or bucket though, which stood out. He walked past us without saying anything, just gave a small nod. I figured he was with someone. 10 minutes later, we heard Tyler calling. Not shouting though, just his normal voice like he was talking to someone. I walked around the end of a row and didn't see him. I called his name and got no answer. I told my sister to stay put and started walking faster down the row. I passed a couple of other families and asked if they'd seen a little boy in a red jacket. One of them said they saw him go towards the back of the orchard. That's when I started to panic. The rows get more spread out in the back, and there's a small clearing near the edge of the woods. There's no fence there. The property just sort of fades into trees and brush. I found Tyler standing next to the man we'd seen earlier. The guy was crouched down, holding something out to him. It looked like a toy. Tyler wasn't touching it, just staring, and the man didn't notice me right away. I yelled, "Tyler, come here." The man stood up fast. He smiled and said something like, he got turned around and I was just helping him find his mom. But Tyler hadn't said he was lost. Tyler's not shy, and he would have called for us or walked back if he was lost. He knew to stay close. I grabbed Tyler and backed away. The guy didn't follow us, but just stood there watching us go. When we got back to the main path, I told one of the workers. He radioed someone, and they went to look. We waited near the barn with Tyler. About 15 minutes later, a staff guy came back and said they couldn't find the man. We filed a report with the sheriff that afternoon. They took it seriously because it turned out there had been another report a week earlier from the same orchard and that same kind of guy. Nobody was hurt, but a little girl said a man asked her to help him find his lost dog. The orchard had to put up cameras, and I'm not sure what happened since then. I haven't been back yet. I don't think the guy was just being helpful. I saw the look on his face before he turned around. He wasn't surprised to see me. He was annoyed, like I'd interrupted him. It made me realize how easy a kidnapping at an orchard could be, though, with all the trees and a lot of space between people. I'm more aware of the areas I bring my nephew to now. It was a nice autumn night, a little chilly but clear. My family and I decided to have a campfire out by the edge of our property. We lived on several acres, and the campfire pit was set up right next to the woods near our old playground. It was far from the house, but we'd used it many times before and never had any problems. We waited until it was dark, then brought out folding chairs, blankets, and snacks. My dad started the fire while my mom helped my little brother with marshmallows. My sister and I sat near the fire talking and making s'mores. After a while, maybe an hour or two in, we heard a sound coming from the woods. It was leaves crunching and a stick snapping. We paused, but figured it was a raccoon or a deer. We get animals out there all the time, so we didn't think much of it. A little later, we heard it again, this time closer. It didn't sound like it was an animal this time. It sounded like footsteps, like somebody walking through the brush. We all went quiet and listened. Then we heard somebody cough, confirming that it was definitely a person. My dad stood up and looked towards the woods. He pulled out his flashlight and shined it towards the trees. A few seconds passed, then we saw him. There was a man standing between the trees, just far enough that we couldn't see his face. Then the light hit him and he ducked behind a tree. We froze and no one said anything. He didn't move or come out again, but we knew that he was there, watching. Without a word, my dad turned and told us to go. We left everything by the fire pit, blankets, food, chairs, everything. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. Once we were inside the house, my dad locked every door and checked every window. We all stayed in the living room waiting to see if the man followed us. He never came out of the woods, at least not that we saw. Later that night, while we were still trying to calm down, my sister and I recalled an experience that we told our parents. A few weeks earlier, we had gone hiking on a trail not far from our place. There was a guy there too, alone, walking behind us at a weird pace. He didn't have a dog or hiking gear, just jeans and a jacket. Every time we stopped, he stopped. Eventually, we hurried back to the car and he vanished off the trail. We didn't think much of it at the time, just a strange guy in the woods. But after what happened that night at the campfire, we wondered if it was the same person. We never found out because we never saw his face. He never came back after that night either, or at least we don't think he did. But after that night, we stopped doing campfires after dark. From then on, we only did them in the daytime, and my dad moved the fire pit closer to the house too, just in case. It was Halloween night 2022. I live alone in a neighborhood that's not that busy. I have a house and about an average-sized yard. But on my street there are not a ton of houses, so I will maybe get like 10 trick-or-treaters a year. Still, I get candy for them, and I just give each kid a lot of candy, so I'm sure that they're happy about it. So on this night, from the early evening until about 8 o'clock, I got the usual amount of trick-or-treaters. It was mostly a pretty quiet night. Then, at like 9 o'clock or so, there was a knock at my front door. I went over to look, thinking that it was just another trick-or-treater, but it was not. There were about 5 grown men all standing there. Each of them were wearing full head masks of various creepy characters. I don't know who all the characters were, just that one of them was a clown and another was like an old man mask. Aside from the masks though, they were just wearing normal clothes. They seemed like grown men, because most of them appeared to be around 6 feet tall or taller. Either way, I decided that I didn't want to answer the door for these guys, so I went back over to the living room and sat down. However, about a minute later, they knocked again. This time, it was louder. I didn't get up thinking that they would not knock a third time, but they did. This time, it was even more loud. I was frustrated and got up to walk over to the door. I supposed that I would answer and see what the guys wanted. But as I was walking over there, I heard someone try opening my front door, which was locked. As I approached, I saw out the living room window one of the men running by and another approaching the window. The guy who went to the window then started to bang on it. Meanwhile, I then heard knocking at my back door, which was really loud. Then I heard another banging coming from a window at the other end of my house. It seemed as though the men had split up and were all at different parts of my house now, and they were all either trying to actively enter my home or bang on a window or door. It was a pretty scary thing, and I decided to call the cops. I knew that I couldn't fight off 5 grown men, and it sure seemed like they were trying to break and enter. I went down in my basement and called the police from there. For a while I heard the banging as I waited. Eventually, though, it stopped. Unfortunately, all the men ran off before the cops got there. After officers arrived, I went out and talked with them about what had happened. They pretty much just made a report, drove down the street and looked around a little, and then left. I was happy that the guys were gone, and I was hoping that it was just a Halloween prank that went too far. Definitely way too far. For the next few hours, things were fine. Then I went to bed. However, I was awoken to the loud sounds of banging coming from all around my house again. It was pretty much the same thing as before. They were at all angles of my house, trying doorknobs and banging on windows. I got up and didn't know what to do. They did this for about a minute. Then they stopped. I went to a window and saw the same guys, still wearing those masks, running away. I didn't call the police again. I stayed up for a little while, seeing if they would return, but they did not, and then I went back to bed. After that night, it never happened again. I obviously don't know who those guys were because they had masks on. They were probably just trying to scare people on Halloween, but they took it way too far. I know this might sound crazy, but this happened a few weeks ago. I still don't really know what to think. Me, my mom, and dad woke up and came downstairs at around the same time one morning like we usually do on weekends. Everything seemed normal. Then my dad stopped at the kitchen counter and said, "Whose phone is this?" There was a phone sitting right there. None of us had ever seen it before. It was a newer Android, black case, no scratches, and looked almost new. We all use iPhones, and nobody in our house uses Android. My first thought that maybe somebody left it there the day before, but we hadn't had anyone over, not recently. We'd just been working and staying in. We asked each other, obviously, but none of us had seen it before. I picked it up and tried to open it, but it was locked with a passcode. No facial recognition, no fingerprint. Just a standard pin lock screen. No notifications were showing, no missed calls or texts. We checked the entire house. Nothing was missing, nothing moved or broken. No sign of forced entry and no windows open. The doors had been locked all night. Our security camera at the front door didn't show anything, but we didn't have cameras in the back. We figured maybe it was dropped by somebody passing by and somehow ended up inside. But how? We tried calling the number from another phone, and it went straight to voicemail. A generic male voice, nothing identifying. No name, no message, just leave a message after the tone. We then tried to look up the number. Google gave us a basic result, Washington State area code registered to a man in his 80s. We didn't know anyone from Washington. We live in the Midwest and have never been there before. Later, I plugged it into a portable charger because the battery had died, thinking maybe we could turn it in somewhere. As soon as it powered back up, it buzzed. A notification popped up on the lock screen, but not a normal one. It was a text message which didn't make much sense. It contained hieroglyphics, and I couldn't decipher the message from it, but there was a link at the bottom of the message as well. That really freaked me out. My parents were both standing there. None of us knew what it meant, but we were not clicking that link. We called the local police station. They took a report, but they basically said unless it was tied to a crime, there was nothing much they could do. They took the phone and said they'd hold it for 90 days. If nobody claimed it, we could have it back if we wanted. We told them we were not going to take it back, and that was the end of that. Overall, a strange and creepy experience. This happened back when I was in 7th grade, and I was trick-or-treating with one of my friends in his neighborhood. His neighborhood is divided up into 3 parts. The first part is what I used to call the normal part. This part is just like every other regular neighborhood. The houses are close together without long walking distances in between. The next part is what I called the big part, which is where all the larger houses were. Finally, there is a section that was very spaced out. In this part, there are a few houses here and there, but there are long distances between them. So my friend and I started out at the neighborhood Halloween party, and then continued out to the normal part, and then the big part for trick-or-treating. Everything went smoothly and was normal, and then we decided to go to the area where the houses were very spaced out. We already had a lot of candy, so we weren't planning on staying too long. We went 2 or 3 hours, and everyone was friendly and gave us candy as usual. But then we went to this one house that had all the lights on and a big bowl of candy outside. It's probably worth mentioning that my friend and I could see a few adults sitting and talking in the living room or dining room of the house. Regardless, him and I ran up to the bowl and started shoveling as much candy as we could into our bags. We didn't stop until we heard footsteps in the house. Then we booked it. We were just getting out of the driveway of the house when we heard a door open behind us. We started running down a small paved path nearby, and then stopped to turn back and look to see if whoever came out of the house had followed us. We saw them in the driveway walking around as if looking for something. Him and I decided it was probably a good idea to go back. We assumed that nobody would follow us down the path just to try to get candy back, so we assumed that we were safe. This is the part where things get creepy. As we were walking down the path, my friend and I would occasionally turn around and joke, "Oh, look at that, it must be the person from the house." We would run for a few seconds until we got tired of the joke. However, there was one point when my friend turned around and then stopped. I stopped him, wondering why we stopped and what he was looking at. "Look over there," he said. He pointed back from where we came, a little off the path. We could see a human figure moving in the darkness on the side of the path, following us at a distance. The most reasonable explanation was that it was somebody from the house that we took the candy from, still following, but we weren't sure. Either way, we wanted to lose them and not have them find out where we lived. Without warning, both of us took off at the same time and ran all the way back to the Halloween party that we came from. I don't think it was the person whose candy bowl we robbed, because I don't know anyone who would react that way to a couple of kids taking too many pieces of candy, but whoever was there was trying to be very sneaky and follow us without us being aware of them. When I was younger, I used to work the night shift at a gas station on the edge of town. Overnight, it would usually be pretty dead. The gas station was not off of a major highway or anything like that, so overnights I would usually be the only person there for a great deal of the night. I didn't mind because I could just chill behind the counter and listen to a podcast or something like that when the place was empty. On one night, it was probably about 3 o'clock in the morning, and we hadn't had anybody get gas in about 30 minutes at least. I was standing behind the counter when I noticed a car slowly pull in. We only had 4 gas pumps and a small parking lot, and the car pulled just between the 2 pumps and sort of just sat there. I assumed whoever it was would just get some gas, and then I noticed another car pull off the road and up to the other one. They both sat there in the parking lot sort of next to each other for a little while. Then the windows rolled down on the 2 cars, and I saw the drivers were both wearing ski masks. This is when I got sort of concerned. They were not getting gas and appeared to just be talking to each other. Finally, I saw their doors both open at the same time, and both men got out. When they did, they both started heading towards the store where I was sitting behind the counter. As they walked towards the door, I looked at the man reach for his side, and it appeared to me that he possibly had a gun. I was terrified. I ducked down, and while crouched over, I ran for the back of the gas station where the bathrooms were, and then ran inside one of the bathrooms and locked the door behind me. Luckily, we had single-room bathrooms, and not just an open bathroom with some stalls, so I felt much safer in there. Just about the same time that I got inside the bathroom, I heard the door to the gas station being opened. I sat on the ground next to the door and tried not to make any noise. I heard the men walking around the store and could hear them say a few words to each other but couldn't make out what they said. Then I heard some louder noises as if things were getting knocked over. I did feel kind of bad for just running away, but if these guys did in fact have weapons, I was no match for them, and I felt much safer locked in a bathroom than out there with them. Eventually, I stopped hearing the men and realized they must have finally left. I waited
waited several minutes, and then slowly opened up the bathroom door and peeked out. As soon as I did, I noticed that both of the men were still inside, and as soon as I looked out, they looked right at me. I saw one of the men was about 30 feet away from me. His mask had been lifted above his face, and I had a better look at him. I immediately shut the door once again, and saw the men start towards me as I did. I heard one of them tell me to come out if I didn't want to get hurt. What I did instead was take out my phone and call the police. At this point, I didn't care if I was hurt because the men already knew that I was in there. I spoke to the police and yelled as loud as I could that I had called them at the same time. The men stopped telling me to get out at that point, but I did hear one of them try the door handle to open the bathroom. I kept the police on the line, and they said they would be there shortly. I stopped hearing the men after that once again, but I didn't dare open the door. I waited for what felt like forever, but at last the police showed up, and I finally came out once I heard them. When I did, the men were gone, and the gas station was somewhat messed up. The cash register had been broken, and several other items were stolen or on the floor. I spoke with police for a while, and then stayed there for quite some time. After reviewing security footage, it was determined that the men did in fact have guns, which looking back makes me more scared and all the more lucky I was okay.
It was just after 9 p.m. on a Thursday. My wife and I had finished dinner and were cleaning up the kitchen. Our house sits at the edge of a long stretch of farmland, nothing but open fields for miles behind us. In front is a double highway, and on the other side of that is a main road into town with a few fast food places, a gas station, and some strip malls. That's about it. We were just about to settle in for the night when someone knocked on the door. I peeked through the side window. There was a man standing there with his hoodie up. He looked like he was in his 30s maybe, and I didn't recognize him. We don't get visitors here. No one comes down our road unless they're lost or have a reason. I opened the door halfway but kept the screen shut. He said, "Hey, sorry to bother you. I lost my phone. I was at the gas station and used Find My iPhone, and it says that it's here, like right around the back corner of your house." I didn't respond right away. I was trying to understand what he was saying. He went on, "I think maybe somebody took it and dumped it, or maybe it's still tracking weird, but it says it's right around here." Now, here's the thing. The gas station he was talking about is across the highway and at least a 10-minute walk. No sidewalk, just ditches and brush. There's no reason his phone would be anywhere near our place. I told him that I hadn't seen a phone and I was pretty sure it wasn't here. He kept looking past me towards the side of the house. He asked again, "Mind if I just check around the back quick?" I said no. I told him I'd look around myself, and if we saw anything, I'd leave it on the front porch. He stood there a second too long. He looked like he wanted to argue, but then he said, "All right, man, thanks," and then walked off. I watched him go. He didn't walk towards the gas station. He went towards the field next to our house. There's nothing out there but open land and a small tree line. I waited until he was out of sight, then locked everything up. I checked the back with a flashlight. No phone, nothing. My wife was nervous, and I was trying not to be. About 20 minutes later, I heard movement. No footsteps, but like something brushing the side of the house. I turned off the lights and looked out the back window. Nothing at first. Then I saw it. A shadow crouched low near the back corner, right where he said his phone was. I didn't open the door. I called the sheriff's office. A deputy showed up first, maybe 10 minutes later. When he pulled into the driveway, the guy bolted from the back and ran off into the field. The deputy chased him a bit, but lost him in the dark. They brought out another unit to sweep the area and didn't find him. What got me was this. There was no phone ping. They checked with dispatch, no missing phone report, no pings registered in the area. Whatever that guy was doing, he wasn't looking for a phone. I still think about it sometimes. What in the world was he doing? And if I'd opened the door wider, would he have tried something? We put cameras up after that, and motion lights too. No one's come knocking since. This happened almost a decade ago when I was 13 years old. I remember my friend and I were excited about our first time trick-or-treating without our parents. It started like any other Halloween night. We collected candy, ran into many of our classmates, and had a lot of fun. At 8 p.m. we realized we had to head home, but on the way back we dropped by my teacher's house. She wasn't home and the street didn't have many streetlights, To add to this, most of the houses had their lights turned off and no Halloween decorations up. My friend and I were slightly spooked and disappointed by the lack of candy. We wanted to get off of the street as soon as possible. That's when a man emerged from under one of the few streetlights. It was a police officer. Neither of us seemed to notice him before this, possibly due to the darkness. He startled us, but seemed very friendly. The cop introduced himself and pointed to one of the dark houses with no decorations. He said an older man living in that house was inviting trick-or-treaters inside. Someone called the police, but when he arrived, nobody was answering the door. He kept telling us his police car and partner were just around the block. We looked around, but couldn't see them. I was a paranoid kid. Growing up, my mom loved watching crime shows, and she'd always tell me tidbits of lessons. One of them was a story about fake cops. Although I don't remember the details, I remembered people can pretend to be police officers to gain trust. Throughout this whole exchange, I was terrified. His lack of a badge, police car, and partner did not feel right. I was also conflicted because he was smiling and seemed like he just wanted to help. That was until we heard his strange request. He said that he needed to speak to this potential predator and needed our help. Since we were young girls, the man would answer if we knocked. The officer claimed that he would hide behind the bushes next to the front door. He would wait for the man to invite us in, then jump out and catch him red-handed. At that moment, I knew my friend felt the same way I did. We both fell silent, but my friend managed to ask the officer if we could discuss. The cop said yes, but told us we had limited time. The street was silent, and he could hear everything that we would say to each other. I remember the feeling of wanting to say something, but fearing that he would hear us and escalate the situation. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever. The cop was getting increasingly impatient and told us that we had to decide quickly. At that moment, a family came down the street and noticed the officer. They were coming over to see what was happening. That's when the cop said he would be right back and to not go anywhere. My friend and I scrambled to collect our thoughts and decided to run away. We sprinted out of the street and didn't look back. On our way home, we discussed theories that ranged from him being a fake cop to him playing a prank on us, or him being a real cop, but we misunderstood the situation. When we told our parents, we downplayed it a lot and doubted our experience. In the end, we didn't call the police, but our dads drove to the house and the area around the house. No cop cars or police officers were in sight. Over the years, I can say I regret not calling the police. At the time, my friend and I were convinced that we misunderstood what happened. We even told our class the next day, and most, including our teacher, thought it was not alarming. Looking back, I find it extremely strange a police officer would put two children in such a potentially dangerous situation, especially without our parents present. I wonder what his motives were, but it will unfortunately remain unsolved.
I used to go to Starbucks all the time. I would say at least 2 or 3 times a week I would stop at Starbucks for coffee on my way to work. I would order online every time as I left my house and then pick it up on my way. I got it so often that some of the employees started to recognize me, and I would be friendly with a few of them. Sadly though, the lines at the location I usually went to were always super long, and one day I realized another Starbucks that was also on my way to work. I made the choice to switch locations to see if it would be faster, and it was in fact quite a bit faster every single day, and it saved me some time. After I would say about a couple of weeks of going to the new location, one day I forgot to place my order online. It wasn't a big deal, but I would just have to order at the drive-thru at the Starbucks. When I got there, the voice on the other end of the speaker of the drive-thru said hi to me and called me by my name. This surprised me because I had only been to that location 3 or 4 times at that point, and it wasn't a daily basis or anything. I also didn't recognize the voice as it was a man's voice, and all the people I knew from the previous location were females. I pulled up to the next window after I ordered, and a man with a headset came to the window. I paid and he handed me my coffee and smiled. He once again said my name and told me to have a nice day, then he winked at me. The man was rather tall and had sort of long dark hair with a slight beard. I have to say I had never seen him before, but beyond that I really didn't think anything of it. It wasn't until every single time that I would go to Starbucks after that, he would be working and would always be the one to hand me my order. Each time he would wink at me or have an almost creepy grin on his face. None of this really bothered me though, but it did feel a little bit strange. Then I stopped seeing the man. There were different people every time when I got my coffee in the morning, and I didn't really notice the fact that I wasn't seeing this strange guy anymore. One of the times I went inside to pick up my coffee and was walking back to my car when suddenly I saw the man again. He was in the parking lot, and he approached me as I was getting into my car. I didn't really recognize him at first. It took me a few seconds. He said hi to me and smiled and asked me how I was doing. I said fine in a confused tone and asked what he wanted. He then asked me how the movie I watched last night was. Then he winked at me like the past times and walked away. I stood there next to my car in shock. I had in fact been watching a movie the previous night, but I had no idea how he knew about it. I was really creeped out, and for me, this was the last straw with the man from being slightly weird to completely creepy. I had no idea who this guy was other than the fact that he worked at the Starbucks and was creepy. I decided to go back inside the Starbucks and ask another employee who he was. I first looked around the parking lot, but the man was gone. I then walked inside the Starbucks, which was relatively busy, but nothing too crazy. I went to the counter and asked who the man was with longer brown hair, a slight beard, and pretty tall. I was told in response that it sounded a lot like a guy named Jonathan, who had worked there but had been fired for inappropriate behavior around the workplace. They said he had worked at another location close by, but had moved to that location shortly before getting fired. I briefly told my story. I was told by several people that they thought he seemed creepy and had apparently followed one of his coworkers home one night. It gave me the chills as I realized this Jonathan guy most likely was outside of my house the previous night and saw me watching a movie. So many thoughts started to race through my head, such as how did he know where I lived, and had he followed me home or been to my house before? I had to go to work at that point, so I left, but throughout the day I texted with several of my friends about what had happened. Later that day I got home from work and asked my friend Lisa to come over and keep me company. I got home and shortly after heard the sound of Lisa pulling up. I was so relieved because I really didn't want to be alone in my house that night after what had happened. But then I received a text from Lisa saying that she would be there in about 15 minutes. I went over to look out the window and noticed a different car driving slowly down the street outside my window. I lived in a quiet neighborhood and there wasn't a whole lot of cars that went down the street, so I sort of noticed when they did. It was a black car and the windows were tinted. It parked across the street, but slightly past my house. Of course, I was paranoid and worried that it was the Jonathan guy. I watched the car from my window, hoping to see anybody get out of the car that wasn't Jonathan from Starbucks. But nobody was getting out. Then my phone started to vibrate and ring in my left hand as I held the living room curtain open with my right. It just about gave me a heart attack, and I closed the curtain and looked at who was calling me. It was a number that I didn't recognize. I decided to answer it. The voice on the other end was the familiar voice of Jonathan. I heard him ask me why I was watching him and told me to come outside. I freaked out at this and screamed as loud as I could that I was calling the police. He then hung up on me and I opened the curtain slightly to see his car pulling away. I then called the police and they said they would be on their way. They arrived a short time later along with Lisa. I gave them as much information as I could on Jonathan and I stayed at Lisa's house the next few nights. Finally, I was told that Jonathan had been found and I would no longer have to worry about him anymore. He had worked at the first Starbucks I had been to almost every day and apparently asked to transfer when he realized I had gone to another one. I just wonder how long he knew where I lived or how many times he had been to my house without me noticing.
It was a crisp autumn night when I decided to go for a hike. I needed to clear my mind, and being out in nature always helped. It was a fairly easy hike that I had chosen to do, just a quick evening hike. I parked my car at the trailhead, grabbed my backpack, and started up the path. The trail was narrow, but well marked. As I walked, I noticed a few people coming down, but there were no others on the path going up. An hour or so into the hike, I heard someone behind me. It was a bit unusual because the trail was wide enough for two people to walk side by side, but I was alone. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was someone who started later or took a different route. I quickened my pace a little, hoping to stay ahead of whoever it was. I glanced back occasionally and saw no one, yet the sound of footsteps followed me steadily. I tried to focus on the beauty of the hike, hoping that whoever was back there would turn off on another path. After another mile, I took a short break by a small stream.
I sat on a rock, drank some water, and listened carefully. The footsteps had stopped. I felt a brief relief, but was still uneasy. I told myself it was probably just a coincidence, maybe someone on the trail who had their pace slowed down. I continued on as the sun was getting lower and shadows lengthened across the path. The feeling of being followed returned, though. I'd hear footsteps, then silence. I would turn around and see nothing but trees and rocks. I could hear the footsteps clearly now, almost as if they were matching my pace. I picked up my speed, hoping to reach the summit soon. I reached a viewpoint where the trail widened a bit. I decided to stop and look over the valley below. I needed a break and hoped that whoever was following me might have stayed back. Suddenly, I heard a rustling noise behind me. I turned quickly, expecting to see someone, but there was nothing there. I thought I saw a shadow move among the trees, but it could have been my imagination. The sun was setting, and I knew I had to make it back before dark. I started down the trail, moving faster than before. The footsteps had returned, closer now. I was terrified, and tried not to look back, afraid of what I might see. As I rounded a bend, I saw a figure ahead of me on the path. It was a man, dressed in hiking gear. I called out to him, hoping that he was a fellow hiker who might have some information or could help. He didn't respond, just stood there, facing away from me. I approached cautiously, calling out again. The figure didn't move. When I was close enough to see his face, he turned around slowly. His expression was blank, and he didn't say a word. His eyes seemed distant, as if he wasn't really seeing me. I took a step back, really freaking out at this point. I decided to take another path that led off the main trail, hoping to avoid any further confrontation. I went faster, hearing the footsteps still behind me, but never quite seeing anyone. When I finally reached the parking lot, I looked back up the trail, but there was nobody in sight. I checked my car quickly and drove off as fast as I could. Later, I told a few friends about what happened, but they mostly shrugged it off as my imagination. Every time I think about that day, I can't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me the whole time. The memory of those footsteps, always just behind me, still haunts me.
A couple of years ago, I rented a small house. I lived alone, and my house had a small front and backyard in a pretty busy neighborhood. I worked not that far away, about a 10-minute drive from my place. One night, I arrived home from work like usual. I went on my phone all the time, and I remember using it after arriving back home. So, as the night went on, I found myself relaxing on the couch and watching TV. This lasted for several hours, and was probably my favorite activity to do on a random night without anything going on. I would just channel surf and watch the shows or movies or whatever that were on. A couple of times I got up to use the bathroom that night or to go to the kitchen, and at one point I went down to the basement to get laundry. When it got late, at about 11 o'clock, I was tired and decided to go to bed and call it a night. I hadn't been on my phone in a few hours. I assumed that it was right next to me on the couch though, which is where it usually would be when I was there. My couch was very comfortable, and I also had a few blankets on it. I looked around though and could not find my phone. I quickly became frustrated. I picked up all the blankets on the couch and shook them. I expected my phone to fall out, but it didn't. This had happened before, but every time before my phone had been there. So I started looking through the couch cushions. I thought that maybe it had fallen between them, but when I looked, I still couldn't find it. I was like 90% sure that I had left my phone on the couch, so I didn't know what was going on. I started to try and remember the last time that I had used my phone. I couldn't remember exactly when, but it was for sure at my house and probably at around 7 p.m. or so when I was still on the couch. And I hadn't left my house at all the whole night, so I knew it had to be inside. I started walking around the living room, looking on the floor and on the coffee table and everywhere. My place was not that messy, so I was getting more and more confused. Where could it be? I remember I started exclaiming to myself, "Where is my phone?" in disbelief. I hadn't remembered taking my phone with me when I went to the kitchen or basement, but I guess it was possible, so I decided to try to retrace my steps anyways. I mean, it had to be somewhere. So I started looking all around the house, and my place really was not that big. It was just one level and then a basement. There was the living room, a small dining room area, kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, and closet on the first floor. Then an unfinished basement with laundry and another bathroom was downstairs. I first went downstairs and looked around. The phone was not there. Then I went back upstairs. I looked in the kitchen, dining room, and bathroom. Nothing. I hadn't been in my bedroom yet, but I went in anyways, and it wasn't there either. Then I went back out into the living room, confused as can be. When I looked back to the couch, there it was, my phone. It was just sitting there sort of half covered by a blanket, but visible. I felt crazy. Was I really that insane that I somehow had not noticed this before? I knew for a fact that I had looked there. I just picked up my phone, shook my head, and then went into the kitchen to put my cup in the dishwasher before heading to bed. But when I got in the kitchen though, I noticed something. The back door to the house was unlocked, and it also looked like it wasn't closed all the way. Like it was mostly closed, but you had to really push it to make sure that the door shut completely. When I saw this, my eyes must have got real big. I went over, pushed the door shut, and locked it. I knew that I had the door closed before. I rarely used it. Then the crazy realization hit me. What if somebody had been inside the house with me? What if they had took my phone, and for whatever reason, when they realized I was looking for it, they put it back? Maybe when I was in the basement, they returned it. It sounds crazy, but I knew the door had been closed all the way before, and how else do you explain it? I looked through my entire house, and nobody was inside, so at that point, I went to bed. I don't live in that house anymore, but the experience still makes me wonder. I never saw or heard anyone, and why would they take my phone and then give it back? Maybe they could not unlock it with my password. Maybe they thought I would find them. I don't know, I'm just guessing. But where were they hiding? My bedroom or the closet possibly. I know it might still sound crazy, but I know I searched everywhere that night. I recently got a job delivering pizzas in a small town in North Carolina. I just started, and this was my first night shift. I was going back to the store after a delivery a little after 9 p.m., and I saw this thing riding towards me on a bicycle. It looked like a person for the most part, but it was wearing one of those blank plastic Halloween masks that you can get at any store. The mask had a wavy line from the top left to the bottom right, which separated the mask into a purple half and an orange half. I couldn't tell what it was wearing because it was too dark out and the clothes were black. Out of the top of the mask there was something that could have been hair, but it seemed strange to me. The hair was at least a foot tall on its own, and the only way I can describe it was as a plant of some sort. It looked like a bunch of tangled branches and vines all sprouting from the thing's head. It was doing a wheelie all the way down the street towards me without losing any sort of balance. The thing that really tipped me off that this thing wasn't human though was the aura that it gave off. I couldn't stop looking at it for more than a second. It drew my eyes almost magnetically, and every single second I looked at it, the more terrified I felt. It wasn't just my natural reaction of fear either. It felt powerful and evil. My heart started pounding. I was screaming involuntarily, and tears welled up in my eyes. I was about to make a turn when I saw it coming towards me, and as soon as I completed the turn, the thing disappeared. I turned around to look back down the street I was just on, and it was just gone. I was extremely rattled, but I knew I had to make it back to the store. I made a slight left turn on the long avenue where my store is located when I saw the thing riding towards me again, still doing a wheelie. It started out on my right, but rode around me to get to my left as I proceeded towards the store. I was trying my best to outrun it, but it was keeping up with me until it suddenly jumped off the bike onto the sidewalk with hardly any effort. I whipped my truck into the store lot, hoping it meant safety. To my horror, I saw a bicycle not belonging to anyone in the store leaned up against the wall directly in front of my parking spot. I looked across the street to where I had seen the thing hit the ground and saw that nothing was there. I hesitated to even leave my truck, but I had to complete my shift, so I went inside with my guard up. My coworkers were all fine, but there were no customers in the store. That's not unusual considering the time of night, but that meant that the bicycle owner was not inside. I rubbed my face for a few moments in front of a fan and grabbed my next delivery. I exited the store to discover the bicycle was gone, even though I hadn't noticed anybody move it. I worked the rest of my shift until 11 p.m. and didn't see the thing again. The bike stalker was gone. The whole way home, I was unnaturally paranoid. Around every curve and corner, I feared it would be standing in the road waiting for me. I've seen a lot of things in my 20 years, but I've never experienced anything like that. This happened when I was a kid, about 10 years old or so. Halloween was one of my favorite times of the year. I would always go trick-or-treating with my best friend Aaron, and we lived pretty close to each other in the same neighborhood. On this year in particular, on the evening of Halloween, Aaron came over and we got ready to trick-or-treat. I can't remember what our costumes were, but we set out and first hit all the houses on our street. We lived in a large neighborhood, but our street was really small. I think there were like 10 or 12 houses on it, and surrounding it was a large park and a golf course. Then to get to the rest of the houses, you had to cross a busier street. We got all the houses on our street within like 15 minutes. Then my mom told my older sister to drive us to the other neighborhood. We obviously wanted to go there so that we could get more candy. And one spot in particular had nice houses that were really large, and so the owners gave out way more stuff. My sister was 16 or 17 at the time, so she could drive, and we got in the old minivan that she drove to school. She drove Aaron and I to the nice neighborhood, and we began going to all the houses. Our plan was to just go to as many houses as possible until it got too late. We each had a pillowcase for our candy, and we ended up getting a ton. My sister would drop us off at the street, and then she would drive to the end of it and just park. Once we got to her, she would drive us to the next one. This routine went on for a few hours. Eventually, it was getting late. Aaron and I were planning on calling it pretty soon. We got to this one street, and as we were approaching the end, I remember seeing this guy. We were walking up the front yard to one house to go trick-or-treating there, and I glanced over a few houses down for whatever reason. These were houses that we hadn't been to yet. I saw the guy dressed in this creepy costume. He had sort of baggy and torn clothes, and part of his face was painted. I'm not sure if he was supposed to be someone specifically, or if he was just supposed to look creepy, but he was standing in his driveway and just looking at us. I guess that's why I noticed him. But then I just looked away, and Aaron and I reached the front door of the house that we were going to. We got candy there, and then went next door and got candy at the next house as well. Then we reached the house that I saw the guy in the driveway. He was no longer there, and I assumed that he went inside. We were considering not going to the house, because all the lights appeared to be off. That was usually a sign that nobody was home or that they had gone to bed. But I told Aaron how I saw the guy in the driveway just a couple of minutes earlier, so I knew that he was home and probably still up. I figured that he could give candy to just one last group of trick-or-treaters, so we went up and knocked on the front door. At first, there was nothing, but like 10 or 15 seconds later, I heard somebody walking to the door. Then it opened, and the same guy who I had seen was there. He answered the door, and we both said trick-or-treat, but the guy didn't have any candy with him. He looked really creepy with his costume or whatever it was. He just stared at us for a few seconds. Clearly this guy knew that it was Halloween, so where was the candy? I thought that maybe he had run out. He then told us to come inside. He didn't say anything else other than that. Aaron and I didn't want to. We knew better than to enter a stranger's house. When we just stood there, he once more told us to come in. I said, "No thanks, we'll just take some candy and be on our way." The man said that we would have to enter the house and that there was nothing to be afraid of. I remember looking into his house and considering it. Maybe there was a creepy decoration he wanted us to see or something. But when I looked in the house, I saw no Halloween decorations at all. It just looked like a sort of cluttered and messy house, and all the lights were off. I said, "We'll just go then." Aaron and I started to back away to leave. The man told us again to come inside, this time more demanding. By now, we both really got creeped out. We turned around and started walking quickly away. That's when I heard the man start to leave his house. Then we both just took off running. We sprinted through his front yard and into the street. As we were running, I heard the man going into his yard and running after us. I figured that it was a joke and that the guy was just trying to scare us. But I didn't know for sure, and it was still really weird, and I didn't want him to catch up to us. So we kept running and made it back to the street. When we were running down the street to my sister's van, we heard the guy stop. He seemed to not leave his yard, which made us feel better. However, we kept running and didn't stop until we reached my sister's car. Thankfully, it was not that far away and just around the corner. We got inside, and when we were back in the car, we told my sister all about it. She said that it was a good idea that we didn't go in the guy's house and that he sounded like a creep. Then we said that we were done for the night and she could go back home. So my sister pulled a U-turn and began to drive back. This meant that we were going to drive by that guy's house again. I remember that as she drove past, we all looked in the direction. What I saw was the car that was parked in the man's driveway now running. As soon as we passed by, the car left the driveway and pulled onto the street behind us. We looked and saw the same man was driving it. Aaron and I started freaking out and told my sister to get away from him. We went down the street and my sister turned. The man went the same way. My sister then started driving faster and we went to a busier street. By now, though, all the roads were pretty quiet. He followed us to the busy street and trailed us for a little while. Then my sister randomly turned to another street. He turned as well, and my sister then turned at the first option. The man behind us did too, until my sister turned quickly again. Then the man did not. We then drove to the end of that street, which connected to the busier one. Then we went back to our street and arrived home without seeing the man for the rest of the way. After getting back, we were all pretty creeped out from it. We went inside and were afraid that the man would show up at our house or something, but he didn't. Aaron went back to his house, and my sister and I didn't see the man at all. It was a crazy experience. We never trick-or-treated on that street again purposely to avoid that guy. Looking back, I'm not sure what his intentions were. It could have just been a prank to scare us, but it seemed a bit much to me. I'm just glad that we didn't enter his house and that he stopped following us. This story takes place in the fall of 2016, right in the heat of the whole killer clown thing that was going on for a while. My cousin and I were both in middle school at the time, and I was staying over at his house one night. There were quite a few people in the house that night, including us, my aunt and uncle, and my younger cousins. It will be easier to understand the story by explaining the layout of the house and yard first. They lived in a rather large double-wide trailer that they bought that was positioned on a flattened part of a hill. Their driveway is a rather steep gravel slope that connected to the road at the bottom of the hill. Behind the house and up the hill was nothing but woods. My cousin and I were the only ones still awake this night, watching TV in the living room. We kept hearing noises in the woods behind the house. We could see into the woods from the window in the living room where we were sitting, but we didn't pay much attention to the noises since it was kind of windy. Plus, my uncle had lots of motion lights outside the house. The motion lights were positioned in the back facing the woods, the side door close to the driveway on the opposite side of the house, and on the porch that overlooked the front yard and the road. Because of all the motion lights, we weren't too worried about anyone or anything being outside, since anything out there would trigger the lights. We had heard lots of stories and watched lots of YouTube videos about the whole killer clown thing that was popular at the time. Personally, I didn't think that it was real. I thought it was just prank videos. Also, we live in a small town in northeast Tennessee where everyone owns some sort of firearm, including my uncle. We were never afraid of anyone dressing up as a clown and trying anything. The only lights on in the house were the TV and the dim light up above the kitchen sink that was only a few feet behind the couch. Suddenly, the motion detector light in the backyard turned on. We noticed, but we didn't think anything of it. The lights were set on a 10-minute timer, and if it detected movement, it would stay on and turn off after 10 minutes if no other movement was detected. After 10 minutes, they went back off, so we figured that it was just an animal, which wasn't uncommon. After about 20 minutes, I went to the bathroom down the hall. I did my business and washed my hands. But when I came out of the bathroom, the motion light on the side of the house by the side door that entered into the laundry room turned on. I could see it shining through the thin blinds that were on the door. I heard what sounded like footsteps on the gravel outside, and then the doorknob started rattling quickly like somebody was trying to open it. Luckily, the blinds were shut, so whoever it was didn't see me. I ran back into the living room to tell my cousin. My cousin had heard the same thing I did, because he was already up and halfway into his dad's room to wake him up. At that point, I saw the light from the front porch come on, so I got up to look out the window that looked out to the porch, but I couldn't see anything. My uncle had quickly grabbed his pistol and a flashlight and was out on the front porch looking for whoever or whatever it was. My cousin and I were behind him on the porch watching. He looked around with the flashlight for a bit, and eventually we saw something. There at the bottom of the hill, in the ditch by the road, was someone dressed up as a clown in a cheap-looking costume. The clown was facing up the hill towards us, and it just looked at us and waved. My uncle fired a warning shot, and the clown ran across the road and into the woods. My cousin and I didn't sleep anymore that night, while my uncle stayed out on the porch for a few more hours to make sure that nobody came back. I don't doubt that it could have just been a high school kid playing a prank trying to scare whoever was in the house. After reading some more experiences with these clowns of people's lives actually being threatened and in danger, it still scares me to think of what the clown would have tried to do if he was able to get inside the house. About 5 years ago, I worked in an office building in the city. I lived in an apartment building pretty close by, and so I would walk to and from work every day. This was good for me because the walk would be easier in my opinion than driving. Parking in the city can be difficult, and my office did have a garage, but you had to pay for the spot, which was stupid. Also, I hated driving in the city, and the walk was only like 20 minutes and the exercise was nice. So I would have the routine of making the walk every day. The city was usually pretty busy, with lots of people on the sidewalks and cars on the street. It was also common for me to stop along the trip to get coffee or sometimes some food on the way back. One time I arrived back home from work to my apartment only to realize that I did not have my phone. I wasn't sure exactly where it was. The possibilities were that I had lost it on the walk home or that I had forgotten it at work. I was hoping that it was the latter. For the rest of that night, I just went without my phone. I knew there was nothing I could really do. If I had lost my phone walking, then I was pretty much screwed, because somebody would have surely picked it up. So the next morning, I got to work hoping that my phone would still be at my office desk. Unfortunately, it wasn't. I was very disappointed. So I logged onto my work computer and was wondering if I needed to buy a new phone that day after work. But when I logged onto my email, I saw something. There was an email from this woman named Emily who I did not know. I clicked on it and her email had her picture and she said that she had found my phone. In her email, she said that she found the phone on the ground and that she had it with her and wanted to give it back to me. I was really happy to hear that. Emily said that she worked that day and was busy, but I could come over that night to her house and pick up the phone. I responded to her email and said that I could come by that night. We emailed back and forth a little bit and arranged for me to pick up the phone at 8 p.m. and she gave me her address. So after work, I went back home and then later on drove to the house. I had to write down the directions to get there because I did not have my phone, of course. But when I finally arrived, I realized that I was not in the best of neighborhoods. It looked kind of sketchy, but whatever. I figured it wasn't that big of a deal. So I got out of my car and I walked up to the house. It was a smaller, old-looking 2-story house. It looked similar to most of the places in the neighborhood. After I walked up to the door, I knocked on it. I was right on time as to when I was supposed to arrive. I looked around though, and none of the lights appeared to be on inside the house. This confused me a little, but overall, I didn't give it that much thought. After about a minute, I finally heard somebody approaching the door from inside. When it opened, I expected to see the woman who had emailed me, but I did not. I saw a man there who was a bigger looking guy with a neck beard and was balding. He invited me to come inside the house. I said that maybe I had the wrong address and I was there to pick up my cell phone. I added that a woman named Emily had emailed me. The guy said that Emily was his wife and she was inside and I could come in. Feeling better, I entered the house and went inside. It seemed like most of the lights inside were off for some reason. There were just a few dimly lit lamps around here and there. Overall, the house was not very nice. It was messy and cluttered inside. The man led me into the kitchen where all the lights were off. He told me to have a seat and I sat down at the table. Then he said he would get his wife and let her know that I was there. I said okay and he walked off. I sat there and was confused as to what was going on. For the next couple of minutes, I became more and more uncomfortable. I just wanted to run out of there. I had a bad feeling. And if Emily knew that I was coming over to get my phone at the agreed time, why would she not be there? What was she doing? I would have hoped that I didn't even have to come in the house and she could just hand me the phone and I could be on my way. After sitting in the decrepit kitchen for like 5 minutes with no signs of Emily, I thought about getting up to investigate. But that's when I heard footsteps coming back towards me. The man with the neck beard was back. He told me that Emily was actually in the basement and I would have to go down there to get my phone. Then the man simply just walked away out of the room. I wasn't able to ask him why because he walked off so fast, but this was seeming way too sketchy. I got up, and instead of looking around for the basement, I just left. I mean, why would I be forced to go down into the basement of this sketchy old house? Was Emily so important that she couldn't simply just give me the phone? Or the more important question, did Emily even exist? I walked to the front door and left. Then I ran from my car and drove back home. The next day at work, I emailed Emily again. I told her what had happened and said that it seemed really sketchy. I told her that I really needed my phone though, and asked if she could please meet me at a public location. I even offered to pay. I said, if this is an inconvenience to you, I will pay you. She never responded. I ended up going to the Verizon store after work and got a new cell phone. I'm glad I didn't go down into the basement of that house. I think that the guy with the neckbeard is the one who found my phone. He probably created the fake Emily account. That's why he never responded to my last email. What I am curious about is how he got my email. If he was somehow able to get into my phone, it all makes sense. But I had it locked and my password was pretty secure. Either way, I'm glad that I did not stay in that creepy house any longer. I used to deliver pizzas for a pizzeria in Cape Town, South Africa when I was in university to make some extra cash. I used to deliver to the same house quite often. Incidentally, this place was quite close to where I lived at the time. There was nothing overtly strange about this place, except that whoever would receive the pizza would normally take quite long to come to the door. They would always ask me to pass them the pizza through the security gate instead of unlocking it and making it easier for everyone involved. One quiet night, a call came through for this house, and I collected the pizzas and got to the house reasonably quickly. This time, a lady who I had never seen at this house before opened the door and let me in. It was not entirely uncommon to be let into a customer's house, so I didn't think anything of it. She pointed me towards the kitchen, which was quite a ways down a long corridor, and asked me to drop the pizzas there. She followed me all the way, still nothing weird. The passage opened to an open-plan dining room and lounge area. Through this area was the kitchen through a door on the left. As I was passing through the dining room or lounge area, I saw something that sticks with me to this day. An old-looking dentist chair with a person lying on it. Whether this guy was alive or not, I still don't know. He had a sheet covering his whole body except for the very top of his head and his feet, which were duct taped together. I couldn't tell if he was breathing or not. The lady that opened the door was still right behind me, and she said absolutely nothing. We went into the kitchen and she paid me for the pizzas. At this point, I was either expecting to be attacked by this lady or someone else hiding somewhere, or to be scared by the guy under the sheet doing some sort of a sick joke. Not wanting to give anything away, I didn't say anything and prepared myself to either defend myself or to not be frightened should it be a joke. I walked towards the door, double-checking to see if what I saw was correct and not just my imagination. The lady, still behind me all the way, closed the door behind me as I left and said nothing. To this day, I still have no idea what was happening in that house. It could have been some joke, but I really don't think it was. The presence of a dentist chair still makes no sense, and I didn't see anything else that would suggest the residents of the house collected weird paraphernalia. I drive past that house quite often and still wonder if I was in any danger. Looking back, I wish I would have called the police. It was dumb that I didn't. I guess I was just scared or played it off as I was misinterpreting it.
This happened just a couple of months ago. I was on Facebook on my phone one night, as I would be on almost a daily basis. I was scrolling through my friends' posts and looking at news and other stuff for a while. I was kind of bored, so I just decided to click on the Marketplace tab to see if there was anything cool on there. I had used Facebook Marketplace once in the past to buy a phone, and it worked out really well, so I would go back and look to see what they had occasionally. I saw the average stuff you see: cars, phones, laptops, and other random junk. Then I saw an ad for a free TV. It looked like a newer TV, and I was actually kind of wanting to get one for my bedroom, so I clicked on the ad. I was wanting to see if the TV was broken or had a problem with it, and that's why it was free, or if it was good and working. When I clicked on it, I saw that it was a 50-inch TV. The pictures showed that it was standing on the floor of a carpeted room, and they had one of the TV on, showing that it worked. The post was made by a woman named Barbara, and she said she was moving out and didn't need the TV anymore, but it worked just fine. When I looked, the listing said it had been posted about an hour ago. I responded to the post asking if the TV was still available, and if so, I could pick it up at the earliest convenience. I got a message back from the owner about 10 minutes later. Barbara said that yes, it was, and if I wanted the TV, I could come and pick it up the next evening. We agreed on 8 p.m., and it was set. I was really excited to get the TV, because I knew it was most likely worth hundreds of dollars, and I had been thinking of buying one soon. The next afternoon, I messaged Barbara to confirm, and she told me just to let her know when I was there, and she would let me in. I went to work that day, and when I got off, I went home for a while before leaving for Barbara's. She had given me her address earlier in the day, and she seemed like a very friendly person. I put the address into my phone and followed the instructions on getting there. It wasn't too far away, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. When I got to the neighborhood, it seemed pretty average, a little bit farther out from the city, and the houses seemed to have a little more land. I then turned onto a road which had a sign that said dead end. I kept driving, and when I got to the end of the street, it led to a single skinny driveway, which according to my directions was Barbara's house. The long skinny driveway led right up to a detached garage with an old-looking pickup truck parked in front of it. I decided to drive into the driveway because I didn't want to carry the TV that long of a ways to my vehicle, and I thought it would be easier. Once I parked, I messaged Barbara telling her that I was there. She responded almost immediately, saying that I could come right on in and the TV was on the floor in the living room. I got out and walked up to the front door. It was dark out by now, and as I approached the door, I noticed that all the lights in the house appeared to be off. It seemed a little strange, but I got to the front door and slowly opened it. It was unlocked, and when I got inside, I couldn't really see anything. I looked around on the wall for a light switch, and had to turn on the flashlight on my phone after I couldn't find one within a few seconds. Finally, I found one and I turned it on. A very dim light in the corner of the room appeared. I could see that it was an old living room with lawn carpet and some furniture. I didn't see a TV at all inside, and I suddenly started to get a bad feeling. I walked a little bit farther into the house. There was a kitchen off the living room, which looked pretty average, and then a hallway leading to a back door and another type of living room it appeared. There was also a staircase going upstairs and one going down to the basement. I couldn't find the TV anywhere, and the place was giving me the creeps. I opened up the Facebook app and messaged Barbara again, telling her that I couldn't find the TV and confirming the address with her, asking if it was correct. I waited in the silent house for her response, but I was getting the urge to just leave. Finally, I got a response from Barbara. Barbara said, yes, it's the correct address. And then she said, sorry, I meant the upstairs living area. There's a staircase in the living room you can take. I got suspicious and was wondering why Barbara didn't just come and talk to me, and why she wouldn't have mentioned to go upstairs right away. I walked towards the stairs anyways, though. But as I was about to take my first step up, I heard someone walking to the front door of the house. They were outside and turned around and saw the screen door open up, and the front door to the house, which I had left half open, then swung shut. All I saw was an arm closing it, but not the person. It appeared it was a man's arm, and after the door shut, I heard someone start to come up the stairs from the basement. I walked away from the stairs, and then went to the back of the house. I was really creeped out now, and once I saw the back door, I made a run for it. Just as I was, I heard whoever was coming upstairs from the basement move faster up the stairs. Once I got to the back door, I opened it and went outside. It was tall grass, and I saw many trees and wildflowers. I ran sideways through the backyard until I was in the neighbor's backyard. Then I went through a few more yards. I basically walked through a few people's backyards and then past someone's house to get back to the street. I looked from there at the house I had just been to. I couldn't see much in the night, but my car was there and I knew I needed to get back to it. I then looked at my phone and saw several messages from Barbara. She said, come back, and she asked me why I left in all caps. I certainly did not want to go back there, but I walked slowly down the street to get back to my car, which was parked in her driveway. Once I made it to the front of the driveway, I didn't see anybody in the front yard at all. I then sprinted to my car and unlocked it. When I got inside, I saw that my front windshield had been smashed and the glass was all shattered. I backed out of the driveway, and as I did, I appeared to see a man looking at me from the front window of the house. He had a sort of evil smile on his face. When I got back, I reported Barbara on what had happened. I really don't think Barbara was even real, and it was probably that guy that was looking at me through the window. I think I might have walked into some sort of setup, but beyond that, I have no clue what was going on there.
Two years ago, I had a problem with the tires of my car. My car was fairly new and reliable, but over time the tires started to get a ton of wear on them, and I found out that I needed them replaced. One day when I was out, I happened to be shopping at the Walmart near my house. I was in sort of the corner of the store, and I noticed that they had an auto center there. The auto center was at the very far back corner, and I had never really noticed it before, but I decided to give it a look and see how much their tires were and what kinds they had. As I walked into the area, I could see that nobody else was really over there. I walked over to the desk that they had to see if anybody was working there that I could talk to. There was nobody there though, and when I looked around the auto center, it didn't really look like it was used much anymore and seemed pretty outdated. After a minute or so, I decided to just look at the tire information that they did have and then just leave. The next day, however, as I got home from work and got my mail, I saw that in my mail there was a postcard from the Walmart Auto Center. It was basically just an advertisement to go, and I found it a funny coincidence how I had just been there the day before. But the next day, I got the same thing in the mail once again. It was the exact same postcard, and now it went from a funny coincidence to a bit strange. I took it inside and threw it away. The very next day, I got one again, and the day after that, and the day after that. I was getting the same exact flyer from the Walmart Auto Center every single day as part of my mail. I decided that this was fishy enough, so I drove back to the same Walmart to try to see what was going on. I took a handful of the flyers that I received and went to the same auto department that I had been to before. This time, there was actually someone working there. A man was behind the counter, and I showed him the flyers and told him my situation. He looked at them and said that he didn't know why I kept getting them, and basically didn't have an explanation for me. However, he pointed out to me that none of the postcards had actually been addressed to me and showed me a large stack of them that they had near the counter. When I saw this, it made me realize that whoever was giving me these postcards was not actually sending them to me, but physically putting them in my mailbox every day. I went back home after that and decided I would try to keep a lookout of my mailbox to see who was doing this. The first 2 days, I once again got more flyers, but failed to see who did it. But the next morning, I was up early at about 6 a.m. It was before the sun had risen, and I just happened to be looking out of my window. When I did, I saw a man slowly walking down the side of the street. My eyes locked onto him when I noticed him walking closer to my mailbox. Then, I saw him reach into the pocket of his jacket and place something in my mailbox. I had finally seen who did it, but right after he did, I noticed him look to my window and then look directly at me. I didn't know what to do when I saw this, but before I could think of anything, the man started sprinting up my yard and towards my house. He ran all the way to the front door and tried to open it. Luckily, it was locked, and I watched him run away. I thought he was leaving, but a couple of moments later, I heard the sound of the back door to my house trying to be opened. That's when I decided to call the police. Clearly, somebody was trying to break into my house. When I had called 911, I told them what was going on and started to walk into my bedroom. But as I was on my way there, and literally right after I hung up the phone, I heard the sound of glass breaking. That's when I decided to run into my bathroom instead and lock the door. I didn't hear any noises though after the breaking of glass. I was thinking maybe the man never did enter my house and had just left. I waited and waited in my bathroom for what felt like forever, not hearing anything and waiting for the police to arrive. I couldn't take it anymore, and I finally decided to leave the bathroom and walk out. But as soon as I did, I saw the man standing inside my house about 10 feet away from me, smiling. It was the creepiest thing I had ever seen. The man was wearing a jacket with the hood up, and I couldn't really tell much details of his face, other than he looked like a pretty average guy. I ran back inside the bathroom and locked the door quickly. Thankfully, at around the same time, I started to hear the sirens. The man never did try to enter the bathroom, and the police showed up only to find the man completely gone. They looked around my property and neighborhood, but never found him. After that, I never got anything else strange in the mail, and I never saw the man again, but sometimes I worry he will return. I also wonder what he was doing. if he had seen me at the Walmart and decided to randomly stalk me or what, but I'm glad I've never seen him again.
This happened to me in the fall of 2020 during the COVID pandemic. My friend, who for the story I will call Jay, and I were on our way from New York to Michigan. We were going to do a couple of flooring jobs and also scout some potential properties to renovate and flip. We were using his work truck for the trip, which was a Ford F-150. We decided to leave in the evening and make the drive all night to get to our destination. Some of our trip was on a 2-lane highway that passes through the mountains of Pennsylvania. The highway is far from safe, with elevated mountain terrain with constant turns, and it snakes around a lot. Anyways, I was driving while Jay tried to get some sleep in the passenger seat. I stopped at a gas station to refuel and ran into the store really quick to get some drinks and snacks for the road. It was a little past midnight, and I noticed one other car refueling a few pumps away from us. It was a red or burgundy SUV, but I paid it no attention as I ran back to the truck. Fast forward 30 minutes later, and I was cruising in the left lane going 90 miles per hour. I noticed headlights behind us, and it was the same red SUV from the gas station. I first didn't think much of anything about it, but it dawned on me that this guy had been following me since the gas station. I decided to do a quick test to see if I was being tailed or not. Since I was going 90 miles per hour consistently, I slowed down to 70 and waited to see if the red SUV would pass me. The guy in the car also slowed down with me now, and I was on alert of being followed. I woke up Jay and told him of the situation. Jay is an ex-Army Ranger who is a lot more vigilant than me, and also crazier. Immediately he said, "That's the car from the gas station. I noticed the guy was looking at you extra hard when you passed by him." Jay, being who he was, wanted me to do more tests to figure out what was going on. He told me to switch lanes, so I did, and immediately the red SUV did so as well. Jay advised me to pull over to the shoulder of the highway and come to a complete stop, which I did. And once again, this psycho who was following me slowed down and parked behind us. Jay was fairly confident that this man had a firearm on him, because of the fact that he was confident enough to pull up behind us on the side of the highway. I quickly took stock with what we had in the truck that we could use as weapons. We had a hatchet and a machete, and each of us had a folding knife with us, but no firearms. Jay instructed me next to pull out quickly and gas the car back up to 90 miles per hour. I pulled off the shoulder and stayed in the right lane as I pressed down hard on the gas, but the SUV stayed right behind us now. Jay wanted me to brake check the guy so that he would crash into the back of us, then charge the SUV with a machete and a hatchet and hope for the best. That was very hardcore for me, and I told Jay we weren't going to do that. At this point, the man behind us wasn't an active threat yet, but if he tried to ram our truck or shoot us, then it would be a different story. I asked Jay if he could think of any other way that we could get this guy away from us. Jay looked around inside the truck and grabbed a high-powered handheld spotlight. He opened the back window of the truck and tried to get a good look at the guy. He turned on the spotlight, and I guess it shouldn't have been too surprising, but the guy's front windows were heavily tinted, so we couldn't get a look of his face. I had an idea, and I quickly swerved over to the left lane. As I did that, Jay turned on the spotlight again, hoping to see the man through his side windows. I briefly turned my head at the same time that Jay shined the light at the side of the SUV. For like 3 seconds we had him illuminated, and I will never forget the look of this guy. He was tall, at least 6.5 feet, because he was hunched over the steering wheel. If I had to describe what a crazy serial killer would look like, it was this guy. Just crazy hair, crazy eyes, and the most disheveled face I've ever seen. The light and darkness could have made it look worse than it was, but this guy looked very dangerous. Once the man saw that I wasn't alone, and he knew what we looked like, he exited off the highway at a truck stop rest area. To this day, me and Jay get into a debate about whether I should have brake checked the guy or not. He's under the impression that the guy was a serial killer, and that he would just end up finding another victim. I still stand on the side where purposely getting into an accident with a guy like that could go wrong in so many ways, and that it wasn't worth it. However, I agree with Jay that this guy's intentions were evil. Probably robbery at the minimum, kidnapping and murder at the worst. I'm just glad that we never had to find out, and I hope that nobody else has to deal with him alone. In 2019, I was a delivery driver for a pizza place. I'd been a delivery driver for a while, and I loved the job. I'm super extroverted and loved chatting with people, and it was just fun. I also had my fair share of mildly creepy encounters given that I'm a girl and I was delivering in one of the sketchier areas of my city. I never thought much of any of them or saw any real threat. One night in particular has stuck with me though. I worked the night shift, so from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. Around 8 p.m. that night, some guy ordered his food and the delivery was easy enough. His house was kinda creepy. There were no lights on, and when he answered the door there was a foul smell that immediately hit me. He also didn't say anything. I said my usual, "There's that for you, and could I get you to fill this out?" which was the tip prompt on my card reader. He didn't reply or acknowledge me asking him the question. I didn't think much of it and headed back to the store. Almost exactly when I arrived back, another order popped up to the same house. He had ordered the exact same thing. I was confused, but still not too worried, and took the delivery and had the same experience. No lights on, smelled bad, and he didn't say a word. Headed back to the store feeling more uncomfortable again, I still didn't think too much of it. I started to get extremely uncomfortable though when I arrived back to the store and had another identical order up. My manager at the time didn't understand the creepiness of the whole thing and insisted I take it. Despite my reluctance, I took it. This time when the man opened the door, I said, "You can order more than one pizza at a time, you know," as sort of an attempt at humor. He didn't say anything though and closed the door. I was thoroughly creeped out and did a sort of sprint back to my car. When I looked back at the house, I noticed the light was on and saw someone standing in the window. I couldn't make out any features, but I just assumed that it was the man. In the end, I still don't know who it was standing in the window or why. My manager called me from the store before I was even able to start my car to inform me that another identical delivery had popped up, and he directed me to leave as quickly as I could because he was starting to see the danger in the situation. As the call ended, I saw the man running up to my car. I couldn't move for a second because I was in shock. He was yelling something that I couldn't understand, and I sped away as fast as possible given that I was shaking like a leaf. We blacklisted the man that night, and he made several attempts to call the store. I still have no idea what his endgame was. This happened when I was a freshman in high school on Halloween night. My friends and I weren't quite at the point in high school where we could have any sort of Halloween party to go to, and we were too cool to go trick-or-treating, of course. We were a tight-knit group of 5 girls. We had grown up together since we were babies, and we lived in a rural town outside of city limits. To set the scene, this was a very remote, woodsy area. In our small town, one of the more thrill-seeking activities to do was what we called rolling yards. This was basically throwing rolls of toilet paper up into trees so that streams of toilet paper hang down. It's hard to explain the kind of adrenaline that you get sneaking down a rural road in the pitch black, turning down a long gravel driveway, threatening the group's lives if they make a sound. If you get caught, your parents find out, and maybe worse, you're stuck cleaning up the mess the next day. So my friends and I had decided the 2 weeks prior to this night that we were going to go on a Halloween rampage, and specifically we were going to roll the creepy house right down the rural road my friend lived on. This house had a big scare story between my friends and I for years. We would go on afternoon walks after school and pass by it often. Nobody ever came in or out of the house, but our friend's parents told us that a man lived there and he was a bit of a creep. She gave us a strict warning to stay away from the area. Looking back, the mom worked in law enforcement, and she probably had much more sinister reasons for us to stay away than she told us at the time, of course. The night went like this. Our friend's older sister drove us to the local Walmart after our parents went to bed. All 5 of us loaded up in the back seat of the car, piling onto each other's laps. We parked in the near-empty parking lot of the store at around 11:30 p.m. Then we made our way towards the toilet paper aisle, hyped up on pure adrenaline. We filled the 2 shopping carts completely full of the 99-cent rolls of toilet paper, snickering to ourselves as the clerk eyed us suspiciously while we were checking out. We threw all the rolls of toilet paper into the trunk. On the way back out of city limits, we turned down the music to discuss the play-by-play for the attack. Our getaway driver would park down the dirt road that led to some cow pastures about a mile from the man's driveway to wait on us. The 5 of us would split up into teams, walking along the edge of the woods by the road quietly. If a car would pass, we would drop to the ground and hide. We filled our arms full of rolls of toilet paper and headed towards the long gravel driveway of the targeted house. We each grabbed our rolls of toilet paper and went into the woods alongside of the gravel driveway to creep towards the house. We finally saw the faint light coming from the side of the house by the garage. It was the most terrified I had ever been. Not only was the house creepier in the moment than when we walked past it during the day, but the thought of getting caught by the man that we were specifically told to stay away from was terrifying. But regardless, we ripped open a pack of toilet paper and hurled it up towards the sky. They went towards the highest branch of the big oak tree directly in front of the house. Soon, streams of white were falling out of every tree surrounding the house, and we were getting very cocky and even more fearless the longer we attacked. Suddenly, my friend stopped dead in her tracks and made a loud hush noise. I stopped and hid behind a tree, my heart literally in my throat, as now I saw what looked like lights turning on from inside the house out of the corner of my eye. We dropped our remaining rolls of toilet paper and began running in the pitch black dark to the woods. Another girl in the group tripped and fell on a branch behind me, and I turned to help her when I heard it. Several gunshots rang out loudly from the house, and the man was yelling maniacally into the woods. We all kept running, all crying and wheezing from the adrenaline, and we headed towards the entrance of the driveway. When we were about to reach the entrance, we heard something even worse than gunshots, the sound of a diesel truck engine coming up the gravel driveway slowly. We quickly went as deep into the woods as we could without notifying him that we were hiding, and we stood silently with our hands over our mouths to not make a noise. The man stopped his truck about 30 yards away and turned off his engine. It was totally silent. I could see him from where I stood, and he had a shotgun over his shoulder as he walked towards the opposing side of the driveway, clearly looking and listening intently. In that moment, I truly thought we were going to be found and killed. No one except for our getaway driver knew where we were. Our parents were all asleep. Our ride was a mile down the road, oblivious in her car. I was trying desperately not to cry and sniffle in the silence when I saw the man's shadow raise his shotgun in the air and fire around. I began to feel faint, truly thinking that I was about to pass out from fear when I saw car lights just up the road from the driveway. Panicking, I wondered if the lights would illuminate us in the woods and give us away. But the car seemed to slow down, and I realized that it was our friend's older sister, our getaway driver. She rolled down her window and was talking loudly from opening her car window, giving what I assumed were the police the address of the house that we were at. This made the man angry, and he yelled and ran towards her car for a moment, then backed away, cursing loudly and waving his gun into the air. As soon as he began driving his truck back around the driveway towards his house, we sprinted full speed towards the car and got in. We were crying hysterically, unable to speak, and sweat pouring down us. No one said a word. We cried all the way back to the house. We showered, and I could hear sniffles and crying all throughout the night into the morning. No one said a word about it to any of our parents. We never went rolling again, to say the least. What had begun as a childish prank turned out to be one of the most horrifying experiences of my teenage years, because we lived in the middle of nowhere and we had technically been vandalizing someone's yard. The older sister told us about a week later that she had faked the call with 911. It's still shocking to think about. All I can say is we got lucky that night. Looking back, we should have called 911. We were naive kids who were more afraid of getting in trouble than realizing how at risk we were of being hurt or killed.
Last summer, my girlfriend and I went camping for a weekend. Camping is not something that we do a lot, but we do like the outdoors, so we were looking forward to it. We went to a little spot near the woods and seemed to be the only ones camping in that area. When we got there, we had a tent to set up, which took a lot longer than I thought it would take. But once it was up, it made for a nice shelter, and it was a good thing we had it too, because on the first night, shortly after the sun set, it started to rain outside. We hurried to get inside the tent, and decided to just go to bed early, seeing as we wouldn't be able to make a campfire or anything like that with it raining. It wasn't like a pouring rain, but it was steady, and there would occasionally be a little crack of thunder off in the distance. The sound of the rain hitting the tent was a nice relaxing sound. My girlfriend fell asleep not too long after, but it was only like 9 p.m., and I wasn't used to going to bed quite that early. I just wasn't tired yet, and I couldn't sleep. I stayed up and watched YouTube videos on my phone for a while. I did, surprisingly, have pretty good service out there, which was nice. I had my headphones in, not to wake my girlfriend, and as I was watching a video, I noticed at the top of my vision past our tent, there was a shadow of someone walking by. I put down my phone and looked up to see the clear shadow of a man on the side of our tent. This was strange. We hadn't seen anyone else near us, and this guy seemed to be within a couple feet of our tent facing us. Plus, it was raining a lot outside, and I didn't know why somebody would be out walking. I watched the man slowly walk around to our tent to the other side of it. I removed one of my earbuds and felt my heart start to pound harder and harder. The man walked around to the side of the tent that was near the woods. He then went right by where I was, and I heard a small scraping as if he was running his hand along the side of the tent. I moved back suddenly when I heard this. The man seemed to notice me, but then walked off into the woods. I heard the leaves and trees rustling, going deeper and deeper away. I was glad the man was now gone, but I was concerned as to who he was and what exactly he was doing. I thought about waking up my girlfriend, but ultimately decided not to. I thought I should try to just lay down and go to sleep, because I thought if I stayed up, I might just get paranoid. But as I was laying there, all of a sudden, I heard more scraping against the tent. This time, it was at the side of the tent where our heads were. I looked up and saw the guy was standing right there. I couldn't see any details because I was just seeing his silhouette on the other side of the tent. I lay there not knowing what to do. If this guy did happen to be dangerous or something, I really didn't have anything to defend myself with. I then thought I could barely hear a man's voice mumble something outside of the tent. I couldn't make out anything he said though. Eventually, I saw the shadow back away and out of sight. I didn't hear the man go off into the woods again or anything like that, but I no longer saw his shadow or heard anything other than the rain which was still falling. I laid there looking around for probably an hour and didn't hear or see anything else. Eventually, I was able to fall asleep. The next morning I woke up early at about 7 a.m. It was light out now, and I looked around. The door to our tent had been unzipped and was partially open. I tapped my girlfriend on the shoulder until she woke up. I asked her if she had left the tent at all during the night, and she told me no. I got really creeped out after that, and left the tent and looked all around. There was nobody in sight though, and after telling my girlfriend about what had happened the previous night, we decided to cut our camping trip short and just go home that day.
This is a creepy story that my roommate and I experienced in the fall of our freshman year of college. For context, me and my best friend met in high school and roomed together in college. We were city kids, but went to college out in the country. The campus was secluded from the highway and was surrounded by woods. Our freshman year, we shared a typical cinder block dorm room. 2 single beds, 2 desks, 2 dressers, and a closet with no doors, which had a cutout on the top of it for storage containers. There was enough space for somebody to climb up and sit up there if they wanted to, and we often did. One night, as usual, we stayed up late playing video games and talking for hours. We talked about school and dream jobs and all kinds of stuff. My friend suddenly changed his tone as he told me he was having these recurring dreams that were freaking him out. In the dream, he was walking in the woods and came across a porcelain doll that for whatever reason was very unnerving to him. Every time he went to pick it up, he would suddenly wake up in a panic, like you do when you dream that you're falling. I could see that it was bothering him, but I didn't think anything of it. I told him he was probably thinking too much into it, and it would probably pass in time. This was my opinion on the matter until a few days later. I started having the same dream. One night we both had the dream at the same time, and we both woke up sweating and scared. This happened on a Thursday night, and we decided that since the next day was Friday and we both had a light schedule, we would take our bikes on a ride in the woods near our campus. We needed some time outdoors in the nice fall weather to enjoy nature and the changing scenery. Class ended and we got lunch at the cafeteria. Then we hopped on our bikes and rode to the trail that led to the woods. As we were riding, we remarked the whole time how similar the dream we had been having was to the woods we were currently in. We rode for an hour, and we could feel the tension and uncomfortable vibes increasing the deeper we went on the trail in the woods. Eventually, we stopped when we saw something laying on the ground on the side of the trail. It was a porcelain baby doll with a green dress and bonnet. It was an exact match to the dream we were both having. We both felt really creeped out to the point where we were dripping in sweat, even though it was a cool and overcast autumn day. The most unnerving thing was that the doll was in pristine condition, completely unaffected by the dirt and mud around it. Quickly we looked at each other, and without a word spoken, we agreed that it was time to leave. We hopped on our bikes and took off for campus. Neither of us could sleep that night, so we put on a movie. Eventually we passed out. In the early morning hours, we both woke up and heard a girl giggling. We both thought that maybe a girl had snuck in, but that wasn't the case. We heard a voice say, "Hey, up here," and looked up to the storage cutout above the closet. A red-headed girl in a white dress and an indistinguishable face sat there expressionless. We just stared. In a passive voice, she said, "Why did you leave me there?" Neither of us could speak. The girl screamed this time. "Why did you leave me there?" In a flash, everything on the storage cutout fell to the floor and broke open. The noise was unnaturally loud, so loud that it woke our neighbors up next door, who were also good friends. They knocked on the door from the adjoining bathroom and entered the room. We had no way of explaining to them what happened. We thought they'd think we were crazy, so we told them we thought the base of the cutout broke and dumped our stuff on the floor. They accepted the story, and we spent the remainder of the night cleaning the mess. We never went back in those woods the rest of our time at school. The dream kept occurring, but the frequency of it slowed down and eventually stopped. To this day, as close of friends as we are, we don't talk about the doll in the woods and the redhead girl in fear of having the dream again. Not too long ago, I got home from work one night and went inside. I live in an apartment complex. There are a few buildings in the complex and it's fairly new. The place has parking garages, but I don't pay extra for a space. Instead, I just park in the outside parking lot that the complex has. There's a lot of spaces, but it still ends up filling up a lot. So I typically park kind of far away, but near the side door from my building. So I just get out of my car, walk along the sidewalk for a short ways, and then enter the side door and go upstairs. The sidewalk goes around the whole complex, and many people walk their dogs on it. So on this night in particular, I had stayed kind of late at work. I got back to the apartment at a little after 11 p.m. By now, it was very quiet and nobody else was outside. I left my car, walked to my building, went inside, and then went up to my apartment on the 3rd floor, only to realize that I didn't have my phone. I looked around but couldn't find it. However, I quickly realized that I probably had just forgotten my phone in my car. Many times it would fall out of my right pocket and onto the seat of my car. The seat and my phone were both a dark color, so I would often forget it. This is something that had happened several times before. So I was slightly annoyed, but really it was not a big deal. I left my apartment and walked back downstairs and out the side door to the parking lot. When I got back to my car, I opened the door to find my phone on the front seat. I breathed a sigh of relief and then picked it up. However, when I turned to walk back to the side door of the apartment building, I now saw that there was a man standing there. He was just kind of hanging out right in front of the door. I didn't know where he had come from, but I started to walk back. However, as I walked on the sidewalk, the man did not move in any direction. He was wearing a hood and sort of pacing around a little bit, but not really going that far in either direction, and his overall appearance and demeanor seemed sketchy. To avoid him, I decided to turn to the left and enter through the front door of the building instead. This was not a big deal, and I was not at the intersection of the sidewalk yet, so it was fine. When I got there, I went to the left instead of going straight and headed for the front door. The guy was still there in about the same spot. I veered left and began walking towards the front door of the apartment building, and as I did, I sort of saw out of the corner of my eye the guy start to walk in my direction. Now, he was a long ways away, but it gave me a bad feeling. So I kept walking, and when I got closer to the front door, I could hear the man walking on the sidewalk behind me. Now I had to make a decision. I could go in the front door and have this man possibly enter right behind me. What if he was a sketchy guy and I didn't want him in the building? I decided not to enter but just walk around to see what would happen. I went past the front door and soon heard the man pass by it as well. Then I walked along the front of my building. This would connect with another sidewalk going around the whole complex. As I walked down that, the man trailed me at probably 40 feet behind. At one point, I went down the sidewalk that just kind of looped back to the original one. It was a test to see if the guy was following me or not. When I did, he did the same thing. Now I was really creeped out. I went around the building and was now behind it. There was no door to go inside there from my building because it was actually a different building between and my key wouldn't unlock it. So I kept walking, now going faster. When I made it to the corner, I rounded it quickly. Then I just went for it. I took off running and sprinted a good 50 feet until I figured that the man would be rounding the corner. Then I stopped. I heard him coming around the corner and he was now almost 100 feet back. With this distance, I decided to enter the original side door that I had wanted to go in the first place, as it was now very close by. I went to the door, quickly entered, and got inside. When I did, I looked out to see the man now full-on sprinting towards me. He got to the door as I walked up the stairs, and I heard him trying to open it. He didn't say anything, but he banged on the door a few times. I went upstairs and got back to my apartment. I had never seen the guy before, and I don't think he lived there. I did wonder, though, if he was possibly a resident who just forgot his keys or something. But if that was the case, he used the most sketchy method possible to try to get back in. Why follow someone in the shadows at 11 o'clock at night and try to sneak in? I think he was probably there for no good. Either way, I haven't seen him since. This happened almost a year ago now. It's something that's still given me PTSD, and I'm currently on anxiety medication for it. I grew up in a small town. I was determined to get out of there from a young age. At age 15, I started working at one of the 2 local pizza places. By age 16, I was able to afford a car, a beat-up one, but it allowed me to get on the road and make deliveries, which meant more money. I had previously been robbed during a pizza delivery at a Super Bowl party once. I was held at knife point and had to forfeit all my pizza as well as my cash. This, oddly enough, didn't bug me all that much. I don't know why. To this day, I barely even talk about it, but after that incident, I took to carrying a can of pepper spray. It was late at night, almost closing time one shift, which was 1 a.m. We had gotten a call to deliver 3 pizzas to the next town over, which is a place that is out of our delivery range, but sometimes there were circumstances that would allow us to. The circumstances were that out of all delivery drivers, as well as the assistant manager at the time, there were a few that were peddling drugs. A customer would have to ask for a very specific order, specific sizes, specific toppings, and a certain order. No exceptions. It was a service policy for one of those specific drivers to make this delivery, even if it was outside our range. I was never one of them, but on this night, I was. I knew the trick of the trade, so when I saw the garlic bread bag on top of the more specific pizza orders, I knew it was a drug order. My assistant manager at the time even specifically instructed me to get the envelope from the customer and that he was sure they would tip well. I didn't want to conduct this. My hands were sort of tied though, as the usual drug delivery drivers were already out. I just wanted to finish my shift, so I took off with haste. It took me about 30 minutes to get to the location. It was in a very sparsely populated neighborhood. I went to the door and was greeted by a girl. I went to school with her a while ago, so that put me at ease a little bit. But she had changed a lot. She was pretty at one point and super outgoing. Now she looked like she had developed a drug problem, which isn't incredibly uncommon in my town. She greeted me with a smile and accepted the pizzas. Then, out of the darkness, my arms were restrained behind my back, and mere seconds later I found the barrel of a revolver placed against my head. I instantly pleaded for my life, which seemed to only amuse them. Then the one with the gun demanded my wallet. I saw no point in arguing and told him where he could find it. When I didn't have enough money in it, he demanded my work money. For a little more context, pizza places will typically tell you that their drivers don't carry more than $20 in change. This is a lie. This is mostly said so it doesn't seem like we're carrying more money in case of a robbery situation, but my robbers seem to know this. The guy with the gun hit me in the face when I didn't produce the rest of the money. I usually left this in my car, and he didn't accept my explanation. At that point, I was forced into the house. I screamed for help, but it was accomplishing absolutely nothing. The guy that was holding me threw me on the couch, and the girl had closed the door. I explained to them that I wasn't aware of any policy, and if they had an issue to please take it up with my assistant manager. The guy with the gun, who was clearly under the influence, asked for one driver specifically. He asked why he didn't show up. I told him he was making other deliveries. It took everything in me not to cry at this time. After asking me some other questions that I couldn't answer, he put the gun to my head and pulled the hammer back. He then instructed me to call the other driver and have him present himself. I slowly complied, but instead of grabbing my phone, I grabbed my pepper spray. It felt stupid, but I saw a brief opportunity to get out of there. I elbowed the pistol out of my face and then sprayed the canister onto his. I didn't take any chances. I sprayed him in the eyes, nose, and inside of his mouth. The smell of that stuff still irritates my sinuses when I think about it. Now, I have been in exactly 3 fights in my life before this, and I lost all 3 times. But after spraying him, I hit him in the crotch and then slammed my fist down on his face. We wrestled for the pistol for a few seconds. I managed to get it on the floor and grabbed it away. The other guy took a few steps towards me, but then backed up once he saw I had the gun. Once he saw that I had the gun in my hand, he backed off and asked me to leave. I'm not a violent person in the slightest, but I'll admit I still get joy out of the look on his face when he saw me holding the gun. I was on cloud 9 for a few minutes as I drove away, but once I got a healthy distance from the house, I pulled my car over and had to take a moment to compose myself. I then realized I was still holding the pistol. Upon further observation, I noticed that it only had one bullet in it, and it wasn't the chambered one. He could have pulled the trigger about 4 times before I got killed. He probably was going to use that as a tactic to scare me if I didn't do what he wanted. When I got back to the restaurant, my manager and I got into a heated argument over what happened at the delivery. I wasn't having that after what I went through, so I just left the store early. I couldn't really call the cops at all because I had been part of the drug deal and had agreed to do it, so I didn't think that would be smart. When I got home, I told my stepdad about what happened though. He later went to go find my manager about it. I don't know what happened, but when I got to work on Monday, I clocked in with no issues. I worked there for about another month. Then I decided I'd rather work somewhere else where I wasn't treated poorly and putting my life in danger. This happened back when I was a kid. It was Halloween in the year 2002, and I was 9 years old. I was really excited to go trick-or-treating around my neighborhood and get as much candy as possible. In years past, my parents took me trick-or-treating. This year, though, my dad had to work late, and my mom was home with my younger brother, who was just 2 years old at the time. I think he was sleeping or something, so he didn't go. My mom said that I was old enough to go trick-or-treating by myself, though. Our neighborhood was usually pretty quiet and also pretty safe. It was a long street with many houses on both sides. Then there were several other streets nearby that were also like ours. Overall, it was a very large neighborhood. So I went out early and there were many other kids out. I started on our street, going door to door and getting lots of candy. After our street, I went to the next one over. Then I went up and down it and my bag was getting filled with candy. Still, I wanted more. I knew that there were tons of other houses past the park that was at the end of that street. So I walked through the park and then started going to those houses. Pretty soon, there were not many other kids out at all. I became one of the only ones, as it was quieter over here, but it was also later at night now. I went down a couple of streets there, just enjoying the freedom of being on my own and getting so much candy. I guess I lost track of time. It was 2002, so I didn't have a smartphone like all the 9-year-olds do today. In fact, I didn't even have a watch, so I had no idea what time it was. Finally, though, my legs were getting tired from all the walking, and I decided to head back. I almost got lost, because I was farther out than I had ever been before, and I wasn't sure which way to go. But eventually, I made it to a street before the park and got my bearings back. By now, there were like no other kids out trick-or-treating. It was pretty quiet. However, I remembered that I saw this pickup truck start to slowly drive down the street. It was the first car that I had seen in a long time, and the truck had this light on top of it. It wasn't a police light, but just like a general rectangular light on the roof. I remember that the truck was gray and it started to drive towards me. I got a bad feeling, like I think any kid would, seeing a random car slowly driving towards them at night. I walked faster, but the truck easily caught up. Then when it got a little bit in front of me, it stopped. I looked over and saw the driver's window go down. There was a man behind the wheel. He called out to me, telling me to stop. I did, and the man asked me where I was going. I said that I was going home. The man said that I was out after curfew and that he would have to drive me home. I was not aware of any curfew laws, but I had also never been out that late before by myself, and I was a 9-year-old kid, so I didn't know that much. But I did know better than to get into a car with a stranger. I told the man that I was sorry and that I lost track of time. He said that he would have to tell my parents and that he also needed to give me a ride home. I said that I would walk home now and that it wasn't that far away. The guy said something like curfew law said that he had to drive me home or something like that. I started to walk along the sidewalk and the guy told me to stop and get in the truck. I really didn't want to, so I just took off running. I went down the sidewalk and then I cut through this one random yard. I ran through a few backyards and then went into the street that was behind ours. From there, I cut through more backyards until I eventually got to our backyard. Then I ran around the house and made it back inside. When I got in, my mom told me that she was beginning to worry. I told her about the guy, and she said that there was no man in a truck who was supposed to drive kids home after curfew. She called the cops and reported him. A short time later, my dad came home, and my parents talked to the police, who then talked to me. It was crazy, but I felt better because I had a ton of Halloween candy. A few years ago, I attended a sports game and ended up forgetting my phone there in the stadium. I just know that when I got back, I couldn't find my phone. I had lost it and didn't have any idea as to where it was at first. Now, to be honest with you, I'm not even 100% sure that I did lose it at the sports game, but that was the only thing that made sense to me. I know I had it at the game, and when I got back, I did not. I don't recall using it at all on the way home. So I live in an apartment and live by myself. It's maybe 15 minutes from the sports stadium where the game was. After losing my phone, I was devastated. However, I figured that there was nothing that I could do. I actually called the sports stadium, and they do have a lost and found there. However, after describing the phone and where I was sitting, they said they unfortunately did not have it. The next morning, I was lost without my phone. Like most people, I use it every day for almost everything. So I started looking online for a new one. I didn't want to just buy a brand new phone with how expensive it is, but I also knew that I couldn't go that long without a cell phone. Now, that night, I still hadn't bought a new one as I had been doing research into deals online. I had made up my mind that I would just cut my losses and get a new phone the next day, because I didn't really see any deals that were that great. I would go to my service provider and tell them what happened. However, at like 11 p.m. that night, there was a random knock at my front door. I went over to the door wondering who was there. At my apartment, I really never got knocks on the door, so this was already strange, but with it being so late at night, it made it even more weird. I went over to the door and looked through the peephole to see that nobody was there. So then I carefully opened my door. When I did not see anybody in the hallway, but I did see a phone on the ground at my doormat. It was my cell phone. It seemed like a miracle, and I couldn't believe it. I picked it up and took it inside. The phone was just how I left it. Somebody must have found it and brought it back to me. I didn't know who it was, but I was very grateful. That is, until the strange things started happening. I went onto my phone and saw that some things were different. Like, for example, there were some new photos and videos in my camera roll. There were a bunch of pictures of the street at night, and the videos appeared to be taken by somebody just walking along the street at night. I couldn't see anybody in the videos though, or the pictures, so I didn't know who it was who had found my phone. And then there were some either screenshots or downloaded photos from the 1990s live-action Ninja Turtles movie. It was really strange. Then there was this phone tracking app that I didn't have before. I didn't know what it was, so I deleted it. But that wasn't it. Starting that very same night, I started getting a bunch of random phone calls. At first, I did not answer because I didn't recognize the numbers, but then they called again and again. I eventually picked up, only to be hung up on. And it wasn't just one number, there were several different numbers calling me. I would answer sometimes and either be hung up on or just hear silence on the other end. Sometimes they would leave messages too, but the messages would either just be long periods of silence or it'd be just breathing noises. It was really strange. I started to block all the numbers. There were probably 10 of them in total, and it took like a week of blocking to get them all. Eventually, it finally ended. I'm still wondering who brought my phone back. I mean, I'm grateful that they did, but also what did they do? Was it all just a prank, or was somebody trying to scare me? I think they got my address and stuff because they were probably able to get into my phone. My passcode was 1234, but I have since changed it. This story happened within my first few months at my current job. For some reference, the store I work at is in a plaza around other stores and is in a nicer area. We still get sketchy customers from time to time, but it's much less frequent than when I worked at Walmart. Anyways, that night I was working in the cosmetics section and I made my way up front to get reshop, items that people discarded throughout the store or didn't want to get at the registers to go put out in my section. The store was relatively quiet and slow since it was close to closing. Upon reaching the customer service desk where reshop was held, I saw this woman standing there dressed in a thick coat and looking rather fidgety. It was a colder season, so coats were common for people to wear, and I wasn't super thrown off. She could have been antsy because she had been waiting for a while. I asked her, "Hey, is everything okay? Can I help you with anything?" She looked up at me and kind of narrowed her eyes. She said, "I'm waiting on a manager. Are you a manager?" I told her no, and she just kind of huffed and then asked when they would get there. I told her I'm not sure. There's one manager in the store and he's probably in the middle of one of his closing duties. She huffed again and just turned to face the store. At that point, I just thought that she was a regular Karen. I again asked her if there was anything I could help her with in the meantime. She just shook her head and I left her alone. I was debating on waiting with her until a manager got there. But even though it was slow, I still had some work to do, and I figured that he would be there soon enough. I grabbed my reshop and headed back to my department. The next day when I came in for my shift, my closing manager pulled me aside and asked if I remembered the lady from last night up at customer service. I said yes and asked if he had gotten to her. He said no and explained what happened. Apparently, this woman had a note and a gun on her. Her plan was to give the note to the manager, announcing that she was robbing the store and had a weapon. However, since during closing hours there's only one manager and they have a million things to do, it takes them a while to do or get something done out of those closing procedures. The lady had left the store because the manager was taking too long and went to the store right next to us. She did end up robbing that store instead of ours. Nobody to my knowledge was harmed though, just shaken up, which I don't blame them for. There's no doubt it was a close call that night, or what might have happened if she really did have a weapon and wanted to stick with our store. If I did decide to wait with her for the manager and the lady got other ideas, who knows what would have happened. Around a year ago, this girl at my work expressed she had feelings for me. I was planning on moving away for the school term, and I said now wasn't the best time for me as I was moving soon. She understood, took it well, and honestly, things really weren't that awkward at work. Fast forward a little bit now. I started noticing that she would always be at work when I was, and later heard from 2 coworkers that she was purposely picking up shifts, coming into work early, or even coming to buy something specifically to see me. I didn't think much of it, as that's not solid enough reasons to report someone, and I didn't think it was weird yet. However, the time I started getting weirded out by her was when she would finish her shift and sit in the parking lot for an hour, but would leave when I did, or she would move her car next to mine while on her break. She would get an iced coffee when I was working, and then would sit in the parking lot drinking it for around 30 minutes to an hour. I also started to notice a serious repeat of when I was working, she would either pick up a shift while I was there or come by. Regardless, I was starting to get the suspicion that she knew my schedule, because sometimes I'd work at a different McDonald's in town, and she would coincidentally come by during my shift. When I started putting things together, I started keeping my distance from her at work, which resulted in her texting me, asking if she had done something wrong. Because I didn't respond within the first 2 hours of her text, she started sending more messages, saying that she was going to block me because I hadn't responded yet. I told her that I had a suspicion that all those coincidences from earlier at work were her plan to see me. She denied it, of course, but I had no reason not to believe her. I told her that as long as we were just friends, I was fine with that, but I made it clear that I didn't want anything more ever. More time had passed by, and I had now gone to school for the year, and I was back at McDonald's for the summer, but this time only on weekends and Fridays. But even on my first day back, she started doing the same stuff as before. I tried being cold to her at work, hoping that she'd lose interest, but she kept doing everything she did. All this has been going on for a year, and I never thought to report it to management because she hasn't done anything too extreme. Until recently. I had a coworker tell me that she asked a manager for my address and they gave it to her. Why that would happen, I don't know. Although the address I have on file is outdated, we only moved a bit further down the street, and she knows which car is mine, so she would be able to find it still. I didn't know how to feel about that when I heard it. While I was on a walk, I noticed her car coming off my street. Then, a week later, after I was leaving my shift, I want to say she got done a bit before me or at around the same time. As I was driving home from work, about to turn onto my street, I noticed her car was behind me. I confronted her about it one day after work, not before telling a manager about her driving to my house and everything else that happened. She denied it again and said that she was trying to find a different job because of my attitude towards her. I made 2 jokes at her expense, hoping she'd lose interest and avoid talking, but if that's what she's referring to, I think she's trying to find a way to turn this around on me.
This happened when I was in high school. I must have been a junior or senior at the time. We had just moved to a different city away from family. The area and neighborhood itself wasn't bad, but this part of town really had a reputation for having the most crime, especially catalytic converter thefts. Think of a city that's divided into north and south. We lived in the south side of the city. Some background information that's important. My dad would regularly leave the country for weeks or months at a time and go stay in his country of origin to get away from the stress of the city life, so he was usually always gone, which meant that it was just my mom, my brother, and I. My brother would always go out and was really hardly ever home, so it would mostly just be me and my mom home. I should add that I'm also a female. One thing to note is that my brother has always had this habit of buying trucks, modifying them, and then eventually selling them once he got bored of them. When this story happened, he had a lifted white Chevy Silverado and another lifted truck. I should also mention that the layout of my house is important in this story. The houses in this neighborhood all have the same base layout, but in different variations. My house is basically shaped like a lowercase n, with our front door being down this semi-long hall and our rooms being at the front of the house. Next to our house is a long driveway where half is behind a gate that locks from the inside while the rest of our driveway is exposed. The part of the driveway that is behind the gate is right next to my parents' room. My parents have 2 windows in the corner of their rooms, one looking out to the street and one looking out to the driveway behind the gate. Our house had a partial chain link fence that only covered the front yard but didn't actually enclose it, which meant people could just walk right in through my driveway and across the front yard to get to our house. My dad thought it was pointless to add a proper fence all around the yard since he wanted the yard to also be used as parking, and adding a driveway gate to the front was too much work, as it would require us to get out of our cars to open and close it. Anyways, sorry for the long background information, but I thought it was important to add. Now back to the story. This happened when my dad was out of the country, so it was just me and my mom at home since my brother went out for that evening. My brother had left in his other truck, so the white Chevy was behind the driveway gate. My mom and I were on our own rooms just scrolling through our phones. I was on my phone just doom scrolling when I saw that my mom was calling me. My parents' room is right next to mine, so I thought it was odd that she was calling me instead of just coming over to my room. I answered, and my mom then told me in a quiet voice to come to her room because she had heard a guy talking outside her window and could see him outside. I got up and walked into her room, but I didn't see the guy outside her window. She told me that he had left on a bike, but that she had heard him talking to himself and peering into the driveway where my brother kept his truck. She wasn't sure if he was just some random guy that was confused and wandering into people's houses while talking to himself, or if this was someone that wanted to steal my brother's truck and was communicating with someone else that we couldn't see. I ended up going back to my room since it looked like the guy had left. Maybe about 10 minutes later, my mom lets me know that the guy is back and that he's talking to himself or someone else, but can't make out what he's saying. I go into her room and that's when I see the silhouette of the guy she's talking about. I can't really make out what he's saying, but in the time I'm trying to process who this guy is and what he's saying, he walks off. It's at this point that my mom calls my brother and tells him what's going on. My brother then comes home and my mom tells him the whole story of the weird dude outside in the driveway. Since my brother came home, I thought he was planning on staying home for the whole night since it's just my mom and I alone. Nope. My brother just decides to give me a quick lesson on how to use a pistol in case I need to use it, and then he leaves again. Now luckily, the guy didn't come back after that, and nothing happened for the rest of the night. We didn't call the police because even though he was technically in our driveway trespassing, we didn't hear him breaking in, and we just assumed he was just some guy on drugs that was just wandering around on his bike and talking to himself. Though I wouldn't be surprised if he was there to steal from the truck. I'm not sure if my brother coming home scared him or what, but either way, I'm really glad nothing else happened. I live in a managed complex that has 2 buildings, the main one with the lobby, mailroom, amenities, etc., and the secondary one, which I currently live in. On Sunday night, I had a DoorDash delivery dropped off. I always tell them they can drop off my orders at the secondary entrance in my building so that I don't have to cross over to the main building, but I don't think they've ever actually read that note. No worries. I read the notifications from DoorDash, and I saw it got delivered to the lobby in the main building around 11 p.m. I made my way over, and I noticed my dasher even left a note saying there was a suspicious man in the lobby, and that he was worried that he might take my food. I figured he said this because he was waiting until I got there. When I came down, there really was a guy sitting there on his phone, but carefully watching my food. He saw me approaching and then just said, "You're here." To which I just responded, "Thanks for waiting. Must be the DoorDasher." I picked up my order and started to turn around, and he also got up, except he had started heading in the direction of the elevators, not the exit. He starts chatting.
"I actually live in this building. My name is Tom, and I live in the building number 205. What's your name?"
I give him a fake name and cut the conversation short, the pieces coming together in my mind. This wasn't the DoorDasher. It was the suspicious man pretending to be the DoorDasher, and who had even waited for me to come down as though he made the delivery. To get back to my building, you can either use the elevators in the main building to the 4th floor and transfer to the secondary building, or you can cut across the garage in the main building to the 2nd building. I noticed the key fob in his hand and waited for him to click the elevator and step inside. When I gathered he was taking the elevator, and I knew I definitely didn't want to share an elevator with him so that he knew where I lived, I decided I would take the shortcut through the garage. It's a straight line and maybe a 2-minute walk to the other side. After he stepped in the elevator, I walked through both sets of doors and into the garage, my senses heightened. Halfway through, I decided to look behind me to verify I was alone, only to see his body in the doorway. He hadn't taken the elevator. He was following me. I booked it, heart racing through the garage doors. I started jamming the elevator buttons, hoping it would come quickly, but I could hear the elevator car was still on its way down. In a split second, I tried to think if I would be strong enough to hold down the door with the weight of my body if he came pushing through, but that would mean we would be stuck in this area in the garage with probably little to no cameras, witnesses, or any cell service. I was running out of time. I eyed the stairwell and, carrying my food, booked it 2 steps at a time up 2 floors. I was now on the 4th floor, which is normally the floor you would transfer on to get to the other building. Although I was now in the secondary building, which is my building, I was worried if he indeed was still following me, he'd know which building I lived in. I needed to go back to the main building. If he was still behind me, I would know for sure he was following me, because we just did a circle. From the corner of my eye in the distance, I could see someone taking out their trash from the reflection of the door. At 11 p.m., this was the first person I'd seen, and I needed to be next to anyone. I cut through the courtyard, through the conservatory, and into the hallway of the 4th floor in the main building. Just as I stopped to catch my breath, he burst through the conservatory doors and caught up to me, huffing and puffing. He accused me of stealing the DoorDash, yelling, got in my face, and told me I could be evicted and sent to prison. I couldn't look him in the eyes for longer than like 3 seconds, but he looked bewildered. At this point, the person taking out their trash to the chute was nowhere to be seen, and this man kept coming closer, me backing up, him inching closer. I tried talking loudly, hoping if anything were to happen, the residents in the unit behind me could hear. He continued to raise his voice, claiming that the 119 number on the receipt stapled outside of the bag was the real person's apartment number, and that I had stolen it from them. Taking a look, number 119 was in fact the order number, not the apartment number, but he was convinced it was someone's apartment unit number. For a whole lot of reasons, this logic didn't make any sense, but this implied not that I needed to explain it to him, but I could have been trying to go from the main building, 2nd building, 4th floor, main building, and then 2nd floor to lose him, so that we didn't have to share the elevator and he'd know where I lived. Even if I was taking someone else's order, I wasn't. He was going to follow me to my apartment to verify where I lived and ensure my apartment matched the number on the bag. He was able to catch up to me relatively quickly, considering I was sprinting and out of breath. This means he was deliberately following and chasing me down, which is a man's, circumstances aside, but especially for the rationale of stolen food, I'm not sure why you would ever willingly chase a woman by herself at night, knowing how this would look for him. He was studying my order and receipt, because you had to be in close proximity to the receipt to see that the fading ink read 119. It was never about the order, because why did he pretend to go on the elevator in the beginning, only to chase me across 2 buildings for an order he didn't even know what apartment number I was going into? And it definitely dawned on him that up until that point, we were the only people around. As I was standing there, him inching near me and poking the receipt, I thought that I had heard someone coming through the hallway in the distance. He clicked the elevator button, continuing his threats, and I didn't even wait for him to finish getting on the elevator. I sprinted through the conservatory, through the courtyard, and back to my building, taking the elevator up to my floor. I got to my apartment paralyzed and shaking from what I thought was the end that night. I was so terrified that my breathing got labored and raspy. I don't even have asthma, but I could barely catch my breath for minutes, grasping onto anything I could so that I could feel grounded and not choke from the lack of air. I'll never forget the moment I looked into the garage and saw his body in the doorframe. I wrote a long, detailed email to my management with screenshots from the DoorDash and exact accounts and locations of where everything happened so they could corroborate my account with their camera footage. It's now been 4 days, and I'm awoken every morning by my heart racing, hot flashes, and paranoia with every drop of a sound. This is a new kind of anxiety that I've never felt before, and my days are clouded with fear of bumping into him in common spaces, how to plan my days with the highest likelihood of avoiding him, and how to strategically order and pick up my mail where I can know I won't have to see him. I don't know if these extreme symptoms, especially the heart racing, are normal after this experience, considering I know a lot of women who have had way more frightening, violent encounters with strangers that involve more than what happened to me that night. But this has really been consuming me for the past few days. I really feel unsafe in my own building. Update. This is everything that has happened since the next morning. My management and maintenance, which is 2 men, came knocking on my door. Of course, I was already pretty frazzled from the events of the night before, and although I opened the door, they could see I was visibly shaking. They came to apologize about the events, saying they had seen the footage and that it was scary. I needed to file a police report immediately. The property manager was kind, saying he would sit and call the police with me so that I wouldn't have to do it alone. I asked if they knew this resident and if they were aware. He said they knew who he was, and this actually wasn't the first time he had been reported for bothering a resident. My stomach sank. I quickly got ready and met the property manager downstairs outside our building, but away from areas my property manager has been known to see him hanging near, and we made the call together. After I gave my account, the property manager chimed in with his accounts of what happened too. I was the 4th or 5th female that he has harassed. He's harassed women in the complex before, but never followed them at night. The property manager has managed multiple properties before, but he's never seen a resident following another resident like this before. He usually finds a woman by herself and kind of hones in on them. He doesn't approach men, and he doesn't approach women when they're with men. The people who live on his floor have complained numerous times that he harasses them, making it bothersome for them. He's also been arrested before for harassing a woman. He's been sent to the hospital before for his mental health issues. He was most recently booked and released 2 weeks ago, and management wasn't aware he was back. The responder on the other line noticed this was quite severe, so they sent out an officer on the scene to collect an official report. By this point as we were talking, I learned the resident's full name, birthday, unit number that he lives in, and when he moved in. It's been less than half a year, so assuming he has a 12-month lease, he still has a ways to go. The officer asked if I could remember if he had a tool or weapon in his hands, but I said that I couldn't remember, not that I knew. I said there was camera footage, so couldn't we check and see if he did? But the officer said even if I couldn't remember and it turns out the perpetrator did in fact have a weapon, I can't go back on my word and say there was a weapon or if I felt threatened. I was stunned. I told the officer, but there's evidence of him following me, a woman alone, as well as threatening me across 2 buildings, one of which he had no business being in at 11 p.m. at night. The officer literally asked me if he used the words, "I will kill you or I will shoot you." I said no, but that he was still threatening me. The officer said unfortunately that only qualifies as being a nuisance, but being a nuisance isn't against the law / grounds for arrest. My heart dropped. On top of that, my property manager said they'd been trying to evict him, but there isn't enough evidence, and eviction is a long process. There was nothing they could do. The officer gave me his card with my case number, informing me that I should call him if he ever approached me again or if I felt unsafe. I went back to my apartment, stunned and just trying to figure out the next steps. I decided not to leave my apartment again out of safety, but ordered additional self-defense items, including an apartment doorbell camera, because he had been up close to my receipt bag to know my order number. The receipt also had my name on it. I was worried he would put 2 and 2 together and type my name in the directory outside our building and figure out my unit number. I couldn't risk running into him again, so I had to stay locked up until my camera arrived. Given the information I had about him now, full name, birthday, and the fact that he has a prior record related to harassment, I decided to do my own research and find his public records. To my surprise, I learned that he actually has 6 court cases since 2018, and the most recent court record was from August 2024. His cases have been for stalking, harassment, restraining orders, multiple reissued anti-harassment protection orders, domestic violence, and attempting to get him to surrender his firearms, to which he has refused, so he still owns his guns. Different women have attempted to serve him protection orders multiple times, but failed either because he's tried to dodge it, never showed up to court, or he's been hard to get a hold of. I just couldn't believe it. This man was able to freely move about common spaces in our complex, and management has never mentioned anything to residents nor regarded our safety. Now I knew this was more than just an annoying neighbor, but rather someone who could be dangerous. I was dealing with a man with unresolved mental health issues, who may still be in possession of his multiple firearms, who is angry with me. Given his history of professional stalking, I was worried if he saw me too soon again, he would remember our encounter and fixate on me, and possibly escalate. A few days passed and I hadn't left my building, but I noted that my camera had arrived, so I was trying to arrange for how I could go into the mail room, which is in the building he lives in and the floor he's on. I asked management for footage of our encounter, and after 2 days of dragging on the request, it seemed like they were trying to buy time. They finally sent me clips of our encounters in different areas. In one of the videos, you could see that he followed me into the garage a bit after I'd already gone in, after he had supposedly pretended to take the elevator. And the clip that freaks me out the most, you could see me enter the garage elevator lobby, click the elevator button, frantically pace back and forth, and try leaning my body against the door before I realize I'm running out of time and run through the stairwell. A few moments later, you see him come in, look at the press elevator button, but no one took it. Then deduce I must have taken the stairwell before following suit. If anything, this showed intent. Oddly enough, the footage when he caught up to me and poked the receipt on my bag was missing, but management sent the footage after I ran back to my building. Anyway, a few days later around 6 p.m., I was trying to figure out how to pick up my mail. I have a married friend who lives in his building 3 floors above, and had no idea about any of this, so I asked if she would be comfortable meeting me on the 4th floor of her building, which is where the encounter took place, but where I have to pass in order to go to the mailroom in the main lobby. Deep breaths. I got to the end of the hallway, my friend on the phone the whole time, and opened the door to the courtyard. Hypervigilantly, I looked across the conservatory and saw a man there. I squinted. It couldn't be. It was indeed him standing in the conservatory. He locked eyes with me, started mouthing things, smiling, and then yelling. I began shaking, uncontrollably crying, and then quickly ran back into my building. Now he knew for sure I lived in the 2nd building. My friend was in the hallway behind him, so she witnessed everything as he was yelling and directed at me. She wasn't with her husband either, but he had locked eyes with me and was angry now. There were some people in the hallway frantically asking if I was okay, but I couldn't speak. My friend still on the line told me to go back into my apartment and that she would meet me there with her husband. My friend and her husband came up a few moments later, staying with me as I frantically packed a go bag. We decided it wasn't safe for me to be alone in my apartment, so I reached out to another friend who lives elsewhere in the city and said I could crash at her place. My friend and her husband escorted me through the hallway, me physically breaking down as we neared the elevators, but eventually leading me to my other friend's car. As I write this update, I'm in the living room of her apartment for the 3rd day, figuring out my next moves. On my first day at my friend's house, I wrote management an email explaining the incident with the resident again. This is my 2nd day and still no response from them. My friend went to management with her husband to report the incident since she also witnessed him yelling so it could add to their complaints. She said management was aware of me and my complaints, but they can't do anything because he's protected under the Fair Housing Act. Management cannot deny housing to someone due to their disability, which includes mental illness. For context, most buildings in my city have MFTE units, basically reduced rent apartments that are reserved as part of an affordable housing program in my city. From what I understand, people can qualify for MFTE housing based on income, and sometimes it's combined with disability protections, which is likely how he's able to stay here. So it seems my unit is worried if they evict him, he might be able to sue for discriminatory eviction. I don't have a male partner, which seems to be the only deterrent from the resident. So my sister and her husband are trying to figure out when they can fly in and help me pack my place so I can get out of here. I'm pretty devastated because it's a really beautiful complex with incredible amenities, gorgeous interior, and pretty new. But all this means nothing when my safety's at risk. I have no plans, but I cannot go back to my unit until I have protection at all times in that building. Every cop sees something that they'll never forget. Something that will stick with them for the rest of their life. What I'm about to describe to you is that story for me. This is the most disturbing thing I've ever witnessed. When I turned 21, I joined the police force in a remote town that I won't name. The department needed new officers, and I was a young father who needed the money, so the timing was perfect. Because I was a rookie, they assigned me to the night shift. It ran from 6 at night to 6 in the morning. The guys at the gas station sometimes teased me about my hours, saying that I always worked the crummiest shifts. I actually didn't mind them. I've always been a night owl. The guys even called me Nighthawk, and honestly, I kind of like that. Besides busting people for speeding and pulling over the occasional drunk, I spent most nights sitting back listening to podcasts. In a weird way, it was kind of relaxing. After a year in the department, something happened one night that changed everything. A severe thunderstorm rolled into town and caused major power outages. Torrential downpour flooded most of the major roads. To be in the best position possible when accident reports came in, I parked my cruiser in a parking lot in the middle of town. At 2 a.m., our dispatcher Claire radioed in. She reported that someone who sounded like an adult male claimed to have been kidnapped. They told her they were held captive inside someone's home. Then the call ended. When she redialed, the caller didn't answer. My cruiser had a built-in computer display that showed all the call details. Based on the address, I was about 10 minutes away, so I was probably the closest officer. I radioed in and I told her I'd respond. I also requested backup. Another new officer named Chris chimed in and said he'd be at the location in 5. Claire clicked on her radio but hesitated for a few seconds over the static. Then she said that the callers sounded like they were altering their voice in some way, possibly through digital means to make themselves sound like a child. She used the specific phrase, like a young girl. She concluded that officers should proceed with extreme caution. All of us were pretty close to the station, so we really felt nervous for one another during high-risk cases like these. I radioed back and said, 10-4, and then drove to the scene. When I turned into the neighborhood, I saw that every single street lamp was out. The entire block had lost power. That meant it would have low visibility into the home we were investigating, which put us in even greater danger. I followed my GPS to the end of the street where the house was, and I saw that Chris had already beaten me. His cruiser was idling in front of the house. I pulled up next to him and rolled down my window. Chris then commented on the home's poor condition. I glanced ahead, taking it in for myself. The grass was knee-high. Overgrown bushes blocked out the windows. The roof was dented in several areas and had a ton of missing shingles. It looked completely abandoned. This sent off alarm bells in my head. You can gather a lot about someone's mental state by how they treat their living space. I told Chris I'd take the lead. We both stepped out of our cruisers into the pouring rain, opened our umbrellas, and followed a waterlogged path up to the door. Chris clicked on his flashlight. Whenever a second officer like Chris is present during an investigation, their entire job is to protect the leading officer by monitoring the suspect's body language. If the suspect makes a move on the cop that's interrogating them, they neutralize the threat. Chris made the perfect backup because he was both observant and calm under pressure. This allowed me to focus solely on the suspect's story, and if I was hearing the truth. When we reached the door, I rang the bell. Then we stood there listening for movement inside. Rain pounded against our backs. After a few seconds, footsteps shuffled up to the door. Then they paused. Whoever was on the other side stood completely still, just waiting. A strange feeling came over me that we were being watched. Slowly, my gaze drifted over to the peephole. As soon as I made eye contact, a distorted shape moved back, like whoever was watching us had pulled their head away. "If you're in there," I said, "would like to ask you a few questions. Open up, please." They froze again as if they were thinking about what to do next. Then the lock started turning. The door creaked open, but only by a foot. From the darkness, a man peeked out of the crack. He looked like he was in his early 30s. He was overweight, balding, and wore thick-brimmed glasses. I took a single look into his eyes and sensed that he was hiding something. I informed him that we'd received a call from his address of someone claiming to have been kidnapped. The man acted confused. He apologized and told us,
"It must have been a pocket dial."
I asked him if it was a pocket dial, then how could he explain the voice on the phone call? For a split second, the man averted his gaze, then said that he didn't know anything about a voice. I asked him if there was anyone else in the house, and he said he lived alone. Then I told him that for safety reasons we needed to have a look inside.
"Not without a warrant,"
he said. These days a warrant can be obtained in minutes. I went back to my cruiser, called dispatch, and requested communication with the on-call magistrate. 5 minutes later, Claire came back on the radio and told me the judge approved a telephonic warrant and emailed it. We were clear to enter. I showed the warrant to the man. He reluctantly pulled the door open, and I could see that his hands were visibly shaking. I clicked on my own flashlight and stepped inside. A putrid smell immediately hit me. I scanned around to find the source and saw a hallway straight ahead and a room directly to my right. I shined my light into the room and saw what looked like a living room. It was absolutely disgusting. Piles of clothes and stacks of dirty dishes were spread all across the carpet. Cockroaches crawled all over them. A couch that looked like it was pulled off the side of the road sat at an angle against the wall. This man obviously used this room as his living space. I'd seen these sorts of living conditions in drug cases before. When I turned to look back at the man, he shifted uncomfortably. I made a mental note to check for paraphernalia once I'd confirmed the house was safe. Then I stepped toward the hallway. My foot struck something. I looked down. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw a pink Barbie doll playhouse that I knew I'd seen before. I thought about it, and I realized I'd bought this exact set for my daughter just last year for Christmas. I asked the man if he had kids. He said no, but explained to us that sometimes his nieces came over, so he kept a few toys around for them. Chris and I exchanged a look. No mother in their right mind would allow children into this environment. I told him that this was his last chance to tell me if anyone else was in the house. He assured me there wasn't. I started down the hallway, and the man followed, saying that nothing was down there. Chris yanked him back by his arm and ordered him to stay put. The hallway had an open room on either side and a closed door at the end, which was probably the basement. I peeked inside the first bedroom. Scanning from left to right, I saw more children's toys and even items like diapers scattered across the floor. In the corner, the dark shape of a person was hunched over. I drew my weapon, only to realize that it was a doll sagging its head down in a rocking chair. The shock of that visual made my heart pound. I leaned against the door frame and steadied my breathing. Chris asked me what I had seen. Before I could respond, I had started studying the doll. It was the largest one I'd ever seen. Every bit as big as a person, and the man had dressed it in women's clothing. On the bed beside it, ladies' blouses, jeans, and lingerie were folded into neat piles. Each pile was separated by a color. Meanwhile, the rest of the house was pigsty. What was happening in this room felt wrong on so many different levels. "All clear," I told Chris. I moved further down the hall and glanced into the second bedroom. This one was empty. I reached the final door at the end of the hall, when from behind me the man called and asked if I'd like to see the upstairs instead. I told him, yes, but first I was going to see the basement. The man said again that there was nothing down there. I heard Chris tell the man to stay chill, which meant he was probably trying to follow me down the hall. The closer I moved into this part of the house, the more agitated he became. I reached for the handle. twisted the knob, and pushed the door open. It squealed on its hinges. A set of wooden steps descended into a pitch-black room. I shined my light down. I could only see the area that surrounded the landing. It looked equally as messy as the upstairs. From deep inside the room, in an area I couldn't see, something rattled. I told Chris that I heard movement. The man responded again, apologizing to me and Chris over and over again. Even though it was the last thing I wanted to do, I had no choice. The man was lying to us. Someone was down there. I headed down the staircase. Each step creaked under my weight. The rattling noise from inside the room grew louder. Behind me, the man repeatedly begged us to stop looking around. I neared the landing and swept my flashlight across the stacks of boxes. No one appeared in my line of sight. Across the room, there was another door. The noise was coming from up there. I drew my weapon. I commanded whoever was inside to come out slowly with their hands up. Whoever was inside stopped moving. I shouted the same command a second time. The door remained shut. I crossed the room, sliding between boxes and old furniture that blocked the way. My sights were trained on the door. When I stood within several feet, I paused, listening. Whoever was inside also remained perfectly still. My anxiety ticked up with each second. So many things could go wrong in this situation. I moved to the side of the door frame in case they were armed and tried to fire through the door. I reached for the knob, grabbed on, and twisted. Then I swung the door open. I was still hidden to the side of the frame. If anything besides empty hands emerged, I would have to use deadly force. After several agonizing moments, nothing came. I said a quick prayer and then aimed my weapon right into the room. What I saw, I really can't go into detail on. But basically, this is what happened. A man in his 40s was being held captive in that basement. He was a father of 3 and a respected member of the community. Months after he went missing, everyone, including his own family, assumed he was dead. After 2 years in captivity, he finally got the chance to escape. Earlier in the night, before we arrived, the homeowner brought the victim's dinner down and made the mistake of leaving his phone behind. The victim managed to activate Siri and call 911. When we arrived on scene, the victim had already been confined in a way that prevented him from calling upstairs or making any kind of substantial noise. Then, when I ordered him to come out, he froze in fear. Not because he couldn't obey my command, but because he didn't want me to use lethal force, thinking that he was a threat. Once I opened the door and found him, we arrested the homeowner on the spot and then took the victim to the hospital for immediate treatment. I feel incredibly lucky that no one was harmed and that we could reunite this poor man with his family. But the most disturbing detail, which has haunted me every day since, is how my dispatcher described the voice of the man who made the call. Why was he speaking like a child? The only explanation that really makes sense is that this man was forced to speak in that young tone of a voice for so long that even when he called the station, that's the only way he could communicate. And if he was forced to do that, what else inside that house was he forced to do? These are the questions that keep me up at night.
Many years ago, I worked at McDonald's for a few months. This was way back when I had recently graduated from high school and was attending a local junior college. I was living with my parents and driving to and from school as well as work. We lived in kind of a small town. It was quiet and calm, and not too many crazy things happened. McDonald's was one of the few businesses that we did have in our town. When I worked there, mostly I would be behind the counter taking people's orders, and usually I would work a shift in the afternoon until late at night. The McDonald's was open for 24 hours back then that I worked at, but I would get off of work at 11 because I was in school, and we didn't need quite as many people working in the overnight hours. The McDonald's never really got that busy. We would get customers at the busy hours, but I don't recall it ever being super crazy. After I worked the job for a few months, I was in a routine of work. I would work a few nights a week, typically getting off at 11. At that time, it would usually be very quiet. When I got off of work, I started to notice this one car in the parking lot with the engine always running and the lights on. It was a 4-door sedan, maybe 15 years old or so, nothing really standing out about it. I couldn't tell who was driving, but never really looked that hard. I just remember leaving for work a few times and seeing it each time. It wasn't a coworker because I would have known who it was. At one time, I sat in my car and texted a few people before leaving, so I was there for a few minutes. The driver never got out or anything. At times, I would get out a little early at maybe 10:45 and the car would be there. Or if I stayed a little late till like 11:15, the car was also there. It was there every time that I got off of work for like 2 weeks in a row. It was something that I always forgot about though. I would only really remember or think about it when I got off of work and noticed it again. I was curious and it seemed sort of odd, but then I would just drive home and forget about it. I thought maybe it was somebody just on a break at their job that was maybe not far away. Who knows? But then, one time, the car was there like normal. When I left for work though, the car followed me. It drove the whole way back home to my parents' house, which was like 10 minutes, but a few streets before mine, it turned off. It freaked me out a little, but it didn't follow me all the way home. Then, like the next 3 or 4 times that I got off of work, the same exact thing happened. No matter when I left, the car would leave right after me, follow me for most of the way, and then turn at the same spot before my house. I told myself maybe this person just lives sort of by me, but why would they always leave right after me? It was creeping me out quite a bit. Then, one night, I got off like usual. It was around 11 p.m. I left the McDonald's and walked out to my car. This time, I saw the creepy car was parked right next to mine. Normally, it was parked at least 5 spaces away and in the same general spot. I wouldn't always park in the exact same place either, because when I would arrive at work, sometimes the McDonald's would be busy. But this was the same general area. This car was always at least a few spaces away from me and had never been next to me. But tonight, it was parked right there, and this freaked me out even more. Still, I tried to ignore it. I got into my car and didn't look at the other one. Then I started the engine. After that, I drove away. Right when I did, the car left too. It followed me all the way back. However, this time, it did not turn at its usual place. It followed me all the way to my parents' house. When I arrived back, I pulled onto the side of the road out front. I was afraid to pull into the driveway knowing that it would take longer. I just parked, got out, and sprinted for the house. I ran inside and made it. When I looked back, the car was pulling over too, but at least nobody was getting out. I instantly found my parents and told my dad about it. He went over to the front door and the car was now parked out front of our house. My dad walked right outside towards the car. However, before he got halfway to it, the car very quickly drove away. The next time that I worked was several nights later. When I got to work that night, I brought it up to a few coworkers. I asked them if they had any idea who drove that car. None of them had any clue as to what I was talking about though. That night when I was working behind the counter at probably about 10 p.m., things were very quiet. Nobody was in the restaurant until I saw the doors open and a man walked in. From what I remember, he looked to be in his 40s, was somewhat short but large, and had a slight beard and was balding. He walked up to me and I got ready to take his order. However, when I asked how I could help him, he just said, "Tell your dad that he's a coward." Then he turned around and calmly walked away. He left the McDonald's, and at first I was so confused that I didn't say anything. Then, after he had left, I realized that it had to be the guy from the car. I quickly went to the back and told a coworker. We went out into the parking lot and just barely saw the guy driving away. It was the same car. My manager heard about the whole thing and she let me leave early. I didn't see the car at all. After that, I was given 2 weeks off. When I returned to work, the car never showed up again. I also never saw it at my house either. That's something that still gives me the creeps every time I think back to it. A few years ago, I was on a road trip with my husband. We were driving across the country and doing a lot of sightseeing and visiting parks. So one time when we were in the middle of the road trip, we left the hotel to hit the road. The hotel that we were staying at did not have a breakfast, so we stopped at the McDonald's in town. When we got there, it was very busy. My husband waited in the car and I went to get the food. A lot of other people were standing around inside the McDonald's. I ordered and then waited amongst the other people. As I looked around, I noticed a man across the room. He was standing kind of far away, but he appeared to be looking in my direction, and he started making these weird and creepy faces. I wasn't sure at first if something was wrong with him. It appeared as though he was intensely staring at me, and going from a creepy grin to a mad face. Then he would go back to a straight face. I stopped looking at him because it was weird. When I looked back, he was still doing it. I just kept waiting. After some time, I noticed that the man was starting to walk very slowly closer and closer in my direction. It was like he was moving a foot or two closer, just standing there, and then moving a little bit closer a few seconds later. He soon became just about 20 feet away from me. At last, though, my order was called. I walked up to the counter and picked it up, and then started walking to the exits. I got out of there and was glad to be away from the guy. I went back to the car with my husband, and we continued with our road trip. I told him about the guy, and we laughed it off given the fact that he didn't really do anything. We drove pretty much all day. We did stop a few times to see some sights and to get food again as well as gas, but none of our detours and stops really took that long. We drove until nighttime when we were tired, and then we stopped to get another hotel. This one was a pretty cheap place. We didn't mind much though. In fact, it was a motel. However, we just parked, got the room, and then went inside. After going into our room, I remembered that I was looking out the window. It had a view of mostly just the parking lot. When I did, I saw the same guy from before. He was walking in the parking lot kind of towards the main offices of the motel. As I was looking out the window, at first the man was not looking in my direction, but he then turned his head towards me and saw me. When he noticed me, he went back to his famous creepy smile. I quickly looked away. I could not believe it. We were hundreds of miles away from the McDonald's where I saw him earlier that morning. How was he here, and why was he here? We looked out of the window, but now he was gone and out of sight. It was really crazy. After that, we just tried to forget about it. We watched TV until we got tired. But really late at night, there was a knock on the door. My husband went over and looked through the peephole. It was the same guy. He didn't stay there long though, walking away after about 30 seconds. After that, he didn't come back. We left early the next morning and didn't see the guy at all. We didn't see him for the rest of the trip. But it was so weird. Did that guy follow us all the way there? I mean, it was hundreds of miles. If not, that's one of the craziest coincidences ever. I live in an apartment building that's right across the street from a McDonald's. More than a few times since living here, I've wandered across the street late at night to get something, but one of those times led to a very scary encounter for me. It was a pretty typical night. I often work late and I'm also a night owl. So I was at my apartment, and at about midnight I left and walked across the street to the McDonald's. There is the apartment complex and then the street, which can get busy during the day, and then the McDonald's right across it. However, at this time of night the street was dead quiet. I walked across it and then went inside McDonald's. There was nobody else inside when I got there. I ordered, eventually got the food pretty quick, and then started walking back. I was gone from my apartment for probably less than 10 minutes. When I arrived back to the door I usually enter through, I noticed a woman standing out front. I hadn't seen her before, but thought that maybe she lived in the building. Either that or she was maybe visiting someone. When I got closer, she looked at me and asked if I could let her inside. I didn't think much of it and said sure. I didn't even ask her why, but I didn't feel the need to. She didn't seem sketchy to me, so I went inside and she followed me in. Then I started walking through the hallways to my place, which was down a couple of hallways but still on the first floor. The lady started walking behind me the entire ways. When I got to my place, she was still there. Then she stopped at my door behind me as if she was going to go into my place. I asked her, "What are you doing?" She said that I said I would let her in. I said to the building, not my actual apartment. The woman said that she needed a place to stay and she thought that I said I would let her in. I said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The woman interrupted me and said, "Are you going to let me in or not?" I said not. I quickly went inside and then locked the door behind me. The woman was still standing there right on the other side of the door. Then she knocked on it. I yelled at her to go away. I looked out as she finally stormed off. I thought that she was gone for good, but she was not. About 5 minutes later, I heard more knocking at my door. I figured that the lady was back, but I went to the door to look. She was, but this time she had this big-looking guy with her. He looked angry, and he was now banging on my door as well. I yelled at them to leave. They did not. Instead, they both started banging on my door loudly and yelling at me. They were cursing and telling me to open the door. I was afraid that they might succeed in breaking the door down. Soon I heard a couple of other people's doors open down the hallway. People were no doubt angry from all the noise. At first, this did not seem to stop the angry man and woman. I heard a few neighbors tell them to quiet down though. They ignored it for a while. They banged on the door some more and yelled for maybe 5 minutes. Then they finally stopped and angrily left. I was obviously afraid that they would come back again, but they didn't. I still don't know why on earth that woman thought that I would let her into my apartment. And who was the guy? I figured that she must have let him in the apartment building given the fact that she was already inside. But it still blows my mind how crazy of a situation that was. I didn't go out late at night for a while after that. For a period of time a long time ago, I used to work at McDonald's as a manager. I worked there for about a year and dealt with some crazy things, but one time is by far the craziest thing to ever happen there. It was an average evening for the most part. We got somewhat busy and I was helping with different tasks. At our McDonald's, we never had enough employees and were seemingly always short, so I did a little bit of everything. At one point though, I was in the back for a while, but I heard that someone was asking for me. Apparently there was a dispute with a customer and he asked for the manager. So I walked up to the counter and saw one of my employees looking upset and an angry man on the other side of the counter. I didn't hear any of the conversation, but I knew the employee he was dealing with was very nice. The man asked me if I was the manager and I said yes. He then told me how he was mad because the fries were cold, but he went on to insult my employee and call her stupid. He did not seem interested in resolving the matter, only in letting out his anger towards us. After he started swearing towards us employees, I yelled at the guy and told him to get out. I said we weren't doing anything and if he didn't leave now I would ban him and call the cops. He continued to yell at us and literally everybody else in the restaurant was staring at the scene. Eventually though, the guy finally walked out and left. I was glad that I didn't have to call the police on him. Then we resumed back to normal for the most part. Eventually, within about an hour, we all moved on and were feeling better. As it got later, things quieted down. I remember that at one point, I went to take out the trash. We had dumpsters in an area behind the building. So I walked over to a back door and put a few trash bags in the dumpster. As I did, I saw past the few trees next to the dumpster into the very back corner of the parking lot. There was the man standing in the shadows. He saw me and instantly started to walk over. I didn't want to fight the guy, so I just turned around and walked back inside. Those doors automatically locked, but I just hoped that the man wouldn't come back through the main doors. After I got back inside, I stayed near the doors. Within moments, I heard some loud noises from outside. The guy was doing something, but I didn't know what, so I decided to go out and see. So I walked around to the main doors and left the restaurant. I walked over to see the man. He was outside by the dumpsters, and it appeared that he had taken the trash bags out of the dumpsters and messed them all around. He had dumped them out and there was garbage everywhere. I told the man that he had to stop and leave now or I was going to call the police. Once more he started yelling and cursing at me. This guy had to be insane. He had waited for over an hour as the last altercation was a long time ago, and he apparently was just standing in the parking lot. I kept telling him that he had to go now, but he just wouldn't. So eventually I went back inside and I called the police. I was on a mission to get him banned from our McDonald's forever. I waited inside for the police and the man did not enter the McDonald's for a while. Then, within about 5 minutes, when I thought the cops would be there any moment, the man walked back inside. This time he walked right over to me. I told him that I already called the cops. He claimed that he didn't care, and he just stood there looking at me. I didn't know what he wanted now. I just hoped that he didn't want to fight me or something like that. I stood there and he stared at me. It was like we were having a standoff. Then, finally, the cops got there. When they did, the man tried to run for the other exit. The police told him to come back, but when he didn't listen to orders, they ran after him. The man ran out into the parking lot and apparently went around the building. Eventually, he was caught by the cops. The man ended up having several illegal drugs on him and was arrested. He was also banned from our McDonald's forever, and I haven't seen him since. This happened a few years ago now, but I won't forget it. I was with my girlfriend and we were driving back. It was pretty late, but I had some caffeine, so I was good to drive. However, not long into the drive, we were both very hungry, and we were driving kind of out in the middle of nowhere. We saw this McDonald's sign sort of behind some trees and a ways off the road, so we took the next exit. Then we followed some really quiet and dark roads until we reached the McDonald's. Now, it's worth mentioning that the light that we saw for McDonald's was not lit up. It was just a tall M sign, but those are not always lit up, and sometimes the place is still open. But when we got to the McDonald's, we couldn't really tell if it was open or not. It looked like there was some light on inside, but there were absolutely no cars in the parking lot at all. At least not on the side of the building where we went. There could have been some around back. It just seemed really quiet and almost deserted. Nearby was really nothing else other than a gas station a ways down the road, I think. But we were very hungry, so we decided to park and see if it was open anyways. So we parked the car, got out, and walked up to the doors. Surprisingly to me, the doors were unlocked, and we went inside. However, once we were in, we walked up to the counter and nobody was there. Not only that, but there was really nothing behind the counter at all. It became clear that the restaurant was not open, and it appeared to be abandoned. There were still all the tables and chairs inside the restaurant, but they were very old and outdated. The whole place looked like it was straight out of the 90s. Behind the counter, though, was where you could really tell that things were missing. The strangest part was that there was a light on near the counter. In our time inside, my girlfriend and I were talking with each other about how weird it was. We soon thought that maybe they were going to do construction or something like that, and that's possibly why the place was left unlocked and a light was on. But we didn't hear any noises at all when we were inside, until we were sort of at the back corner of the dining room area. We had been inside for maybe 2 or 3 minutes and were just looking around because we found it interesting how the place looked deserted and was so outdated. As we were just admiring about how it looked untouched for years, we suddenly heard somebody say loud and clear from near the counter, "Can I take your order?" We both looked in that direction at once, but we could not see right to that spot because of where we were. I felt nervous and we both walked over there. However, when we got within sight of the counter, we saw no one. We walked all the way up to it and nobody was there at all. We asked who was there but got no answer. However, we did hear somebody walking back in the kitchen area out of sight. I didn't want to stay any longer. We both just walked out and left. We drove to a gas station some ways down the highway instead. Then we went back home. After that, I tried to look up the McDonald's to see if I could find any information on it. However, I could not find anything. I still don't know who was in there or what the story was with that McDonald's. One night after work, I went to McDonald's. I was very hungry and every other place was closed. It was after 10 p.m., so the options for food were very slim, at least in the area that I live. I went to the McDonald's closer to my work, but on the way home. I pulled into the parking lot, walked in, and ordered at one of the screens. Then I waited for a little while. There were a couple of other people inside, but not many. I really didn't pay them much attention, though. As I waited for my order, I just went on my phone. Soon enough, my order was called, and I got it and then left. I walked to my car, got in, and started to drive home. When I pulled out onto the road, this truck pulled out from the McDonald's right behind me. Then it started to follow me, and by this point where we were basically the only 2 cars on the road. I wouldn't have been that suspicious at first, but then the truck turned where I did and it started honking. I hadn't done anything wrong, and I was wondering why the truck was honking at me. I slowed down and moved to the right side of the road. I thought that maybe the truck wanted to pass me, but when I did, he made no attempt to get by. Then he started flashing his brights on and off. Clearly this guy was really trying to get my attention or had a big problem with me. I pulled over to the side of the road completely and stopped. When I did, the truck went forward going past me, but then went right in front of me and stopped. He stopped in a way where he was basically cutting me off and blocking my path. It was really aggressive. Then the driver's door opened and this man walked out. I recognized him and realized that he was one of the people that was inside the McDonald's. I'm not sure how I noticed so fast, because I hadn't really paid much attention to the people in there. But nevertheless I did, and he was now walking towards my car. It seemed like the guy was up to no good, and I felt like I needed to get out of there. So as soon as the man quickly approached my driver's door, I put the car into reverse. Then I backed up down the side of the road, and the guy quickly went back over to his truck. I made a U-turn and now started going the opposite way down the road. When I did, the man was able to get back to his truck fast enough and started to follow me again. As I was driving the other way on the road now, he quickly caught back up to me. I wasn't sure where to go, and there was not a whole lot around in the general area. Plus, it was late at night, which did not help the matter. As I drove down that road, I just decided to go back to the McDonald's. It was a public place with other people, so it felt a little bit safer. When I saw it again, I pulled into the parking lot. Then I quickly parked. The man in the truck also drove to the McDonald's and parked. I got out of my car quickly and walked back inside as the truck was parking. When I got into the McDonald's, I realized that the man did not get out of his truck. He was still inside it, waiting for me to leave probably, but I was not going to. I went and sat down in the McDonald's and then just waited. I looked out the window watching the guy's truck. I sat there for probably 20 or 30 minutes. Then, finally, I saw the truck drive away. After it left, I left, and I was able to drive home finally. I made it back safe, but I never found out why that guy was following me. Clearly, he really wanted something with me, but I have no idea what. I work from home and live in an apartment. I have my computer set up in the corner of my living room, and that's where I sit all day during the week. My apartment building is pretty new and fairly nice. It's not at all some cheap dump or anything like that. It's located in a pretty populated area about 10 minutes outside of the city. But there was this one time when something really crazy happened. So it was a weekday and I was at work. Like always, I was sitting at my desk in the living room and on my computer. I don't recall the exact time, but I'm guessing at like 1 p.m. or so, I heard a knock on my door. It was unusual for anybody to be at my door, but living in a large apartment building is not a crazy thought, especially with it being right in the middle of the day. I got up from my desk and then walked over to the door. Before opening it, I first looked out of the peephole. When I did, I saw that there were 2 men standing there wearing maintenance uniforms. One of them was holding something and the other guy had a toolbox. Realizing they worked for the apartment building, I opened the door. The first guy said that they were there to change the air filters and they would be in and out really quick. I then noticed the thing the other guy was holding was in fact an air filter. I hadn't got any emails about them being changed, but I couldn't remember the last time that they were changed, so I said come on in and let them in. They walked straight for where the air filter was, which was in this small closet that was in my bedroom. The guys said thanks and they would only be a minute. Then I walked back over to my desk and sat down again and got back to work. For maybe a minute total, the guys were in my room. Then I heard them walking out. The door to my apartment opened and shut and they left, and I was busy working, but about a minute later, I got up and walked over to the door and locked it. Then I went back again and continued working. I worked for about another 4 more hours or so until I was off at 5. Then I logged out of everything and was done with work for the day. I didn't really feel like going anywhere, and I was planning to just order food later that night. In the meantime, I did some small tasks around the apartment. I unloaded the dishwasher or something like that, and then I remembered that I went to take out the trash. We had a room at the end of the hallway for trash, and there was a chute that you would just dump the garbage down. So I took my garbage bag, left the apartment, and walked down the hallway to the end of it. I dumped the trash and then walked back to my place. I was gone for a total of maybe 1 minute. After walking back to my apartment though, right away I saw someone. There was a random guy in my place. He was just standing in the living room, and as soon as I entered, he saw me. My reaction was to quickly leave. I walked out into the hallway. I remember looking at the door and confirming that this was my place. I didn't accidentally walk into the wrong unit. For some reason, I went back in. I didn't see the guy, but I heard the man running into the other room. I was so confused and creeped out that I just left again and went down to the lobby. There I called the cops. I waited there for them, and when they arrived about 5 minutes later, they went up to my place. After they looked all around, they didn't see anyone. The man was gone. But after answering questions and talking to the police, I realized what happened. The men who entered my apartment to change the air filter did not work there at all. There was no plans for the air filters to be changed that day. That's why I never got an email or anything like that about it. The 2 guys walked in, pretended to change it because I was in the other room. Then one of the men hid in the small closet where the air filter was kept. The other guy left, which I did not see because I was over at my desk where it wasn't really in my view. I assumed that they both left, but really I had just heard one of them leaving. The other guy must have waited around the rest of the day for me to leave. When I walked to take the trash out, he must have thought that I was actually going somewhere and would be gone for a while. Then I think his plan must have been to steal my stuff. That's my best guess. But I walked back in a lot quicker than he expected, ruining his plans. In the end, he just left and did not take anything, probably because he knew I would know who did it. The man thankfully ended up getting caught along with his partner in crime about a week later. They had broken into different apartment buildings pretending to be maintenance workers there as well. It was not their first time doing it. They had all kinds of phony plots to get in people's places. They would steal anything of value. I'm really glad that I got back when I did, and that I wasn't hurt or anything, and I'm glad that the men were caught. This story takes place 2 years ago when I lived alone in this house that I was renting. It was in a quiet neighborhood, but it also had a lot of other houses in it pretty close by. So one night I worked late and arrived back home at about 8 or 9 o'clock p.m. I went inside, and after changing I decided to cook something to eat. I went into the kitchen, which was located at the back side of the house. There I began to cook, which is something that I enjoy doing when I have the time. As I was right in the middle of this, I heard a knock on my front door. I stopped and wondered who it could be. It was late, so it automatically seemed weird. The only way to find out, though, was to go and look. So I paused my cooking and walked over to the front of the house. There I glanced out of a window to see who it was before I decided to open the door. When I looked, I saw a man standing there at the step. He was wearing a hood that was covering most of his head, so I couldn't really see his face. In fact, it made him look pretty sketchy, because it also wasn't that cold out or raining or anything. And overall, if you want people to open the door for you late at night, maybe don't be hunched over wearing a hood. I thought, I'm not answering, and I walked back over to the kitchen. Literally right as I was walking over there, though, I heard the doorbell ring. This was different than before, because before he had knocked. I just ignored it, though. I was curious as to what he wanted, but I figured that it wasn't worth trying to find out. I was still fairly new to my neighborhood in that particular area of the city, so I didn't know quite how common crime was, and I thought it best to just leave it alone. I resumed my cooking, and the guy did knock one more time. It was like 2 or 3 minutes after he had rang the doorbell. This I also ignored. I wasn't sure if he knew that I was home or not. I had a few lights on, but not all of them, so it wasn't super bright or anything. It made me think that he did know I was home, though, based on how he rang the doorbell right as I was walking away. Still, after the second time he knocked, it stopped, so I figured that he had gone away, and I felt better. In fact, like 5 minutes after I last heard the knocking, I quickly walked back over and looked out the window. He was in fact gone, and then I returned to the kitchen. I went back to cooking, but this only lasted for about 5 minutes, because then, out of nowhere, I saw him again. There was a window in the kitchen that was pretty much right in front of me. It looked out to my tiny backyard, which was fenced in. I suddenly saw this guy appear right on the other side of the window, walking towards it. Then he looked right at me and knocked on the glass. It scared me, and I quickly ran out of the room. This guy was a big problem now. I went into the living room and got out my phone, ready to call the police. I didn't hear the guy knocking again or anything, though. So after calming down for a minute, I walked back into the kitchen carefully. I looked to the window and didn't see him. Then I went closer and I looked to the backyard and confirmed that the man was now gone. I went around looking out all the windows, and thankfully he was nowhere to be seen. I was really creeped out, though. I still didn't know what the guy wanted, but hoped that he was harmless. Maybe he was just mad that I didn't answer the front door for him. So then he possibly walked into the backyard and knocked on the window just to spite me. Then he left. That was my hope. But what was he doing at my front door in the first place? Either way, I was just glad that he was now gone, and I decided to hold off on calling the cops. I was finally able to finish my cooking after that, with no disturbances. I went into the living room to eat, and then relax and have a nice evening. I hung out in the living room for a while until I got tired. After that, I got ready for bed and went into my bedroom to go to sleep. So I remember that I fell asleep only to randomly wake up in the middle of the night. I woke up and then sat up to check the time. When I saw that it was 1 a.m., I was happy because that meant I could sleep for a long more time. I was about to lay back down to return to sleep, but before I did, I noticed something out the window. It was somebody walking past it. They were not that close to it, but I still saw them. I got up and walked closer to it. They were walking in the backyard. When I looked out of it this time, I saw the same guy. He was back. Now he was walking through my backyard towards the kitchen window again. This time I didn't hesitate, and I took out my phone and I called the police. I told them what was happening, and they said they would send somebody over. I went into the front of my house away from the back and waited. The guy didn't immediately try to break in or anything. I didn't know where he was, though, but I didn't want to look. I didn't think it would be a good idea to confront him. The police got there really fast. It was probably like 2 minutes. When they arrived, they found the man still in the backyard. He was caught, but they could not arrest him. Apparently, they just gave him a warning or something. He hadn't broken in, and it couldn't be proven that he was going to, but he was trespassing. He claimed that he was lost, and then I was also told that he thought his friend lived at my place and it was just a mistake. I don't really believe it, though, because he saw me in the window earlier that night and then still came back. I personally don't know what his intentions were. I never talked to him, but he was pretty much told to stay away or he would be arrested. After that, thankfully, he did. But I still wonder what his plans were and what could have happened had I answered the door for him. This happened not that long ago. It's something that's really crazy, and I'm sure that I will never forget. So it was a normal night, and I was relaxing on the couch watching a movie. For some background, I live alone in a 2-bedroom apartment. I used to have a roommate, but she moved out after the lease ended. However, I decided to renew the lease and just live there by myself because I could afford it. I didn't feel like moving all my stuff to another unit, and I decided to just use the extra room as my office, as well as some extra space to store all my stuff. The apartment is on the 3rd floor of the building, which was built in 2018. On this day, I had gone to work like normal, went to the gym, and then came home. I hadn't left after that. So there I was, sitting on the couch, watching a movie. It was getting to be pretty late at night. Out of nowhere, I heard the sound of things falling down coming from the other room. It sounded like from my office, possibly inside the closet in there, but there was also a chance that it could have been from the hallway or from another person's apartment. It happened pretty fast, and the sound lasted for a total of maybe 2 seconds. Instantly, I was nervous, but I told myself that I was just being scared for no reason. I wanted to go look, but was too scared to. Other than the living room, all the lights were off in my apartment. I didn't hear any other noises, so I figured there was just stuff falling over. I did have a good amount of junk in the closet. I didn't know why it would just randomly fall though, but it was definitely a possibility. I procrastinated going to look and kept watching the movie. However, I was getting more and more creeped out, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to sleep that night unless I went and confirmed that nothing was there. It might sound crazy, and I certainly thought that it was, but I still felt paranoid. What on earth could it be other than just junk falling though? So I decided to go and look. I psyched myself up and then walked over to the office. I turned on the light in the hallway and then turned on the light to the office. At first, everything seemed fine. I didn't hear any noises or see anything. Then I walked in and went to the closet. The door was closed. It was a pretty large closet, nothing crazy, but you could easily walk in. When I opened the closet door, it was dark in there, but I instantly saw a man. As soon as I did, I just took off running. I could not believe it, and everything I did next was just a reaction. I ran to my front door and left my apartment. Thank God I still had my phone on me. I ran out into the hallways and called the police. I told them some guy was in my apartment. Then I walked around the hallways in a daze until they arrived. I was freaking out because I honestly did not expect that at all. When the police arrived, they entered my apartment. Surprisingly, the man was still in there. He was arrested, and I had never seen him before. He would not say how he got in or why he was there. I'm just glad that he was gone. But I never did find out how he got in. I mean, it makes no sense. My place is on the 3rd floor, and the only entrance is the door. I must have somehow forgot to lock it or something. Maybe the lock is broken. I really don't know. What I also don't know is how long he was in there for. I'm going to be creeped out about this for a long time. I'm just glad that I didn't get hurt or anything. This is something that happened when I was 14 years old. Being an only child, I was fairly used to being home alone by myself from time to time. It usually wouldn't happen for very long periods of time though, but every day when I would get home from school for a few hours, I would typically be at home by myself. One Friday in the fall, I went to school and arrived back as normal. My parents were still gone at work, and they would be gone for a lot longer that night. I can't remember if it was my mom or my dad, but one of my parents had a work dinner event thing to go to. So both my parents were going straight there after work, and they would be gone until that night at about 9 or 10 o'clock. And they told me this beforehand and left me money to order a pizza to have it delivered if I wanted. So I was kind of excited for that. I was also excited to be able to just watch TV and play video games all night, or at least until my parents got back. After arriving home from school, I went directly up to my room and started gaming. Eventually, I went downstairs and hung out there for a while. Then when I got hungry, I ordered pizza. I would guess at around 7 o'clock that night, the pizza guy arrived. I answered the door, got the pizza, paid him, and then went up to my room. I started eating pizza and playing video games, which was a dream night for me back then. However, about an hour into this, and I heard the main front door to our house open downstairs. It surprised me right away, because other than my video games and the TV on a low volume downstairs, the house was completely quiet. At first, I thought that it had to be my parents, obviously. But two things were off. Number one, my parents were not supposed to be back this early, and if they were, they probably would have texted me. Number two, I didn't hear them unlock the door. It had simply just opened. As I was thinking these thoughts, I listened and heard somebody now walking into the house, although I could not hear very well being upstairs and in my bedroom. I thought back to when I had picked up the pizza from the delivery driver. That's when I realized that I thought I forgot to lock the front door. I think I just got the pizza and then went back inside and closed the door but didn't lock it. I felt terribly nervous now because I couldn't honestly remember locking it. Meanwhile, I heard footsteps downstairs going closer towards the staircase. I thought about yelling, asking if it was one of my parents, but decided not to. I also thought about trying to yell something threatening or fight whoever was in the house if it was not my parents. But I had no fighting skills. I was a skinny 14-year-old kid and didn't have anything really to use as a weapon either. Now the footsteps had reached the stairs and they were starting to walk up. I got even more nervous. As whoever was in the house was walking up the stairs, I sat there in my gaming chair basically frozen with fear. My bedroom was the second door on the left once you got up the staircase to the second floor, and my door was not closed all the way, it was open about a foot. After the person reached the top of the stairs, I finally had the thought to close my door, but I felt like it was too late, so I didn't. My door had no lock, and the person would see me closing it, giving me away if I did. So what could I do? I couldn't really think of anything. I looked to the door, and the way the door opened was opposite where the person was, so even though they were now in the upstairs hallway, I couldn't see them and they couldn't see me. They continued walking closer at a slow but steady pace. I was still sitting in my chair. I'm not sure if I was just frozen with fear and too scared to move, or if I didn't move because I knew I would make a sound. Because obviously I wanted to hide under my bed or in the closet, anywhere that would be out of sight from this person if they chose to enter my room. But moving now would make too much sound. However, the one thing that I did have going for me was that the lights in my bedroom were off. I liked gaming in the dark. I should also mention that I had paused my game shortly after hearing the door open and the person enter the house, so that wasn't making any sound. The only noise I heard was the footsteps and the very low volume of the TV downstairs in the living room. The person walked right in front of my doorway. Then, for a moment, I saw somebody come into my view in the open crack of the door. I looked away out of fear. I was sure that the person would open the door the rest of the way, and who knows what would happen. But it didn't. I heard the footsteps moving away. I looked back over and now saw nobody there. The footsteps were now going back down the stairs. Whoever it was leaving, and they were also walking a little bit faster. Eventually, they reached the bottom of the stairs and then went towards the front door. Then they left. When I heard the door close, I ran downstairs and locked it. I looked out the windows but didn't see anyone. They must have gone out of sight. I didn't see any strange cars or anything. It was really weird. I then called my parents, who came home. Whoever had entered the house, though, was long gone. Nothing was stolen or out of place, and I never got a good look at them. I think that it was a man based on the little I saw, but that's just a guess. Overall, I have no idea why this person entered our house. Did they know that the door was unlocked? And what did they want inside? After that, I did not want to stay home alone for a while, but I did. I would have to stay at home after school while my parents were at work, but I didn't stay home alone at night for a while after that. This happened when I was a teenager. One night, my parents went out, and my brother went to his friend's house to have a sleepover, so I was left home alone by myself. At first, I was just planning on staying in and relaxing, maybe watching some TV or a movie, or maybe just read or something like that. But I was Snapchatting with my best friend Alexis, and she asked me what I was doing. I told her, and she said I should come over. I guess her parents were gone too, and she was bored. I was too young to drive at the time, and I was not supposed to leave the house when I was home alone, but Alexis lived just a few blocks away, and I could walk there. I figured that I could easily go to her place and hang out for a while, and then be back by the time my parents were home. So I told her that I would come over. I left the house, made sure to lock it, and then walked to Alexis's place. It was maybe like a 10-minute walk. I got there and went inside. We hung out and talked and had some snacks. It was a good time, and I made sure to leave after like 2 hours. I figured that my parents wouldn't be home for another 30 minutes or so, but I didn't want to cut it too close. So I said bye to Alexis and then left. I began walking back home down the sidewalks in the neighborhood. The area was all residential with lots of other houses. By this time at night, it was dark out and the neighborhood was very quiet. Like 2 minutes into walking home though, and I remember hearing a car driving up behind me. But it didn't pass, it just started to drive sort of next to me but a little behind. When it drove that slow, I immediately found it suspicious. I looked over but couldn't see the driver. It was too dark out. I just kept walking and hoped that it wouldn't continue to follow me. But it did. I turned, and so did the car. At one point when I turned, though, the car went past me. I felt better for a moment and thought that it was gone, but then I saw the car turn around and go towards me again. Now I was pretty nervous. I kept walking home and just hoped that I would make it back okay. I started walking faster. Soon I was at our street. I got out my keys and was ready to run. When I saw our house in the distance, I just took off. I ran through the front yard, got to the door, unlocked it, and went inside. After slamming the door shut behind me and then locking it, I breathed a sigh of relief. But then I looked back out the window, hoping to see the car drive away. Instead, the car pulled into our driveway. I couldn't believe it, and was now really scared again. After parking in the driveway like they belonged there, whoever was driving the car stopped. They did not get out for a little while. After like 2 or 3 minutes, I saw the door open. A man stepped out. He had a slight beard, sort of long dark hair, and was kind of tall. He walked over towards the house. At that point, I moved away from the window and ran into the living room. Soon I heard him knock on the front door. I was terrified. Of course, I was not going to answer it. After a little while, he knocked again. I still didn't answer. I didn't know what to do, though. For some reason, the thought never occurred to me to call the police or my parents. After knocking twice, I didn't hear anything for a little while, so I went back over to the window and looked again. I didn't see the man at first, but his car was still there. Soon I noticed that he appeared to be inside of it, but he wasn't leaving. He just kept sitting there. I was really creeped out. Then I saw another car driving down the street. It slowed down in front of the house really slow. I then realized that it was my parents. They stopped, probably wondering who was in the driveway already. Then they started to turn to pull in. The man suddenly then put his car into reverse and backed out. After getting back onto the street, he quickly drove away, speeding in the process. My parents then parked in the driveway, and I ran out to them. I told them what happened, and they called the police. The cops came out, and I talked to them for a little while. After they left, everything was fine, but I never heard anything more about it, so I don't know if the guy was ever found. Of course, I didn't leave the house at night by myself for a while after that. Looking back, I'm really grateful that I was able to get home safely that night, and that my parents got home when they did.